Hello. Good morning, everyone. Let's give it up for the first LACCS retreat. Yay. Oh my gosh, we are so excited to be here today with you all and kick off our time together for this year. We have a great schedule for you all, and so we want to get started. Before I do, I just want to let you guys know that down this hall here are the bathrooms, and we also have coffee and tea and water and some other goodies over here, so please just help yourself to all of those things. But we are going to get started today.
Here's a look at the agenda for those of you who like to know ahead of time. You also, I think, have a copy on your table. So just please note that.
Who are you?
We're going to get there. Who are you?
I'm Katie Hughes.
And I'm Heather Sattler. Welcome. Thank you. This is why we need a team. That's my partner over there. Okay, so want to thank Lauren, who's always our DJ, Lauren Feaster, one of our LACCS coaches. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do a few activities, and the goal of this work is to create an opportunity to really think about how does this become a way of being? How do we live this work, okay? And so I, as an educator, I always find it helpful to learn practices that I can implement, and so we want to share a few practices with you. So if you're taking some notes and you just want to note, we're going to start with some centering, something called a pause practice, which is really simple and lovely, some tableaus, which I already told you about, so I can't wait to see what's going to be created. And then we're going to do some concentric circles. So I'm going to name those activities, but as we're doing this, if you just want to write those down in case this is something you might like to do with your staff, your students, you have these there. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So before we get started, I just want to invite us to put our feet on the ground and take a moment, breathe in, and recognize the wonderful land that we're on, the bodies of water that are near us, and just take a moment, please, to read this to yourself. Okay, and also really important to think about the larger context in which we live and the importance of our work. And also, another slide, thinking about the shoulders we stand upon, the hearts we carry forward. And we invite you to also think if there's anyone else you'd like to honor during this time, just take a moment, and we invite you to do that. This is all of you, and we're going to get to introducing all of you in just a moment. Okay, everyone. So when we think about character work, we think about this is work that starts from the inside out. And doing the work of restorative practice, I always think about it as the first circle. So I'm going to invite us to begin by connecting with ourselves first. okay? And so however you like to still yourself, I always like to really feel the ground beneath me and be intentional about what my body's doing. So I didn't think to ask everyone to bring a blankie, but I would invite people to lay on the ground in the classroom, right? Or to walk around. We have a big space to walk around. Or sit in a way that's comfortable for you, okay? But I invite you to be deliberate about the placement of your hands, right? Be deliberate about how you're sitting, whatever that looks like. Be deliberate about your eyes and where they're resting for a moment. Bless you. And I invite you to connect with your breath. And as you connect with your breath, I invite you to pay attention to your physical body. And really just starting at the top of your head and allowing yourself just to travel down your whole body, moving down your neck and your shoulders and your arms, thinking about your chest and your back, your torso, your seat, and moving all the way down to the bottoms of your feet, feeling the beating of your heart. And I invite you to take a big breath in through your nose and out through your mouth and offer gratitude for your physical body and the strength of your heart. And now I invite you to connect with the space of your heart and what's present with you today. Recognizing that what is in the space of your heart. There's nothing to fix or change. An opportunity to notice with love and compassion and curiosity. Recognizing there's a dance that happens between our thoughts and our feelings and physical sensations in our bodies, and just being present with that. And taking a deep breath, honoring your presence here in the space today. Now I invite you to set an intention for this day. What are you listening for today? And I invite you to consider what state of being will support your intention for how you will choose to listen. Is it open-heartedness? Is it curiosity? What state of being will support your intention? And once you've got that, we're going to take 3 breaths deliberately, however you would like to do it. So I invite you to do that now. Pema Chodron calls this a pause practice and says that pause practice creates an open doorway to the sacredness of the place in which you find yourself. So, if you feel complete, I invite you just to maybe put some movement in your body, your toes, your fingers, and take a look around the room. See all these beautiful people. So when we think about character work, a big part of the work is building community, building connections, co-creating. But first we want to get to know who you are. So I invited you all to do a little tableau activity. We're going to give you about a minute or so. And so when we think about a tableau, think about a portrait, okay? So you're going to all get together as a group from your place in your seat. And we're going to invite you, I'm going to say your group's name. All right, and then we're going to invite you to stand up, and I'll give you a 1, 2, 3, and you're going to strike a pose. Okay? Laces, we're doing this too. We're last, so we got to get it together. And then what we would love to do is have the opportunity to capture your image. So we're going to be recording and taking pictures, and we would like to do this through passive consent. So if you absolutely don't want your picture taken, we want to honor that, and Julie's over here. So please let Julie know, okay? Okay. All right, y'all. You got 1 minute on the clock to get it together. And we're going to go in the order listed on the screen. And Katie's got the timer. You all, time is up. Oh, I would be so grateful. Yes. Yes. All right, everybody. So we have Dr. Jacobs on the camera. Let's hear it for Dr. Jacobs. Whoop, whoop. Okay, so we're going to go in order. So, St. Francis, where are you? Whoop, whoop. Okay, go ahead, and if you want to stand up and strike your pose, your whole squad, unless you've prepared something different, as you like. Okay. All right. We're going to count you off. And then we're all going to clap wildly for them, okay? Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Strike a pose. Whoop, whoop. Thank you. Okay, and Eastbrook, where are you at? Come on up, Eastbrook. Whoop, whoop. Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, hold on, not yet. And strike a pose. Let's hear it for Eastbrook in the house. Okay. Greater Holy Temple Christian Academy, come on up. Now, I've heard they have a specialist on their team, so I have big expectations here. Not trying to put you on blast, you know. Okay. Oh, excellent. See, I told you, they have stage, setting, stage crew, lighting crew. LIGHT. Are y'all ready? 1, 2. Oh, no, not yet. Don't look, we're still backstage, y'all. Look away. 1, 2, 3. Strike a pose. Yay. Whoop, whoop. Welcome to LACCS. All right. Oh, another one. Okay. Okay, and photo number 2. I love it. Okay, Beloit. Okay, we're going to go to Pearls. Pearls, pearls. Whoop, whoop. We heard some ow, ow. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 2.4. Okay, all right, ready? And go. Yay, woohoo. Okay, and then we have Walker. Walker, whoop, whoop. Everyone, look at, woo, woo, woo. All right, 1, 2, 3, strike a pose, Walker, whoop. Okay, all right, LACCS squad, come on over here, LACCS. LACCS team, come on, team LACCS. Yep, all of you. I think that's a great idea, thank you. All right, ready? All right.
Come on, Julie,
Okay, thank you. Okay, everybody. So now we all have seen each other. So how many of you, when you think about listening, really are deliberate about how you listen? Just think about how you listen during the day. Are there moments when you're very deliberate, when you're sort of busy, deliberate doing things? Or those moments like when you're coming to a LACCS presentation in the morning and your son has his car fob in the pocket of his pants, and then you come home and the cat's in the ceiling, so you have to take a pause practice to breathe, and no one was listening? That was me this morning. So anyway, but just think about that. So when we think about connecting as a community, good morning, a big part of the work is listening to ourselves, right? That's where we start with that first circle, and then really taking a moment to see people, that kind of listening where we observe people and are paying attention to what they're saying through their moves, right? And now we have an opportunity to practice listening. So we're going to do some concentric circles, right? So we're going to, in a moment, we're going to form a big circle, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask some questions. And what I'm going to invite you to do, if you're the person who is listening, I'm going to invite you to simply listen without talking. You're welcome to nod and smile and react, but simply listen, okay? And then if you're the person who's talking, I invite you to talk from your heart. And if you don't have anything else to say, that's okay too. You're welcome to do a little dance together. All about the dancing, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna invite you to stand up over here. Come and make a big old circle. A really important and juicy space of learning is that space of reflection. So we're going to take a moment and do some reflection, okay? So I'm going to ask you a question in a moment, and you're welcome to choose how you want to respond to this, okay? You're welcome to raise your hand or just do this internally. But in a moment, I'm going to ask, while we were engaging in this listening practice, did you find it easier to talk, to listen, or were both about the same? And I want to say, in general, I love games. You might have gather that, because they're a wonderful way for us to learn about ourselves and each other in a very gentle way and approach topics that can be really challenging very gently, okay? So if you feel comfortable and you want to do this out loud, raise your hand if you found it easier to talk. Okay, great. Raise your hand if you found it easier to listen. Okay. And it's good to notice everybody, because we're a community here, right? So it's helped. And how many of you found both to be about the same? Wonderful. Okay. So here's what I would love to say. One of my beloved first teachers of circle practice, Yvette Morel, taught me this, and I love this so much. And she basically said to us, if you're somebody who's more comfortable talking, you have an invitation to balance that love of talking with listening, right? We call it like creating space for other voices. And if you're somebody who tends to feel more comfortable listening and not as comfortable talking, there's an invitation for you to bring forward your voice because it's necessary. And if you're about listening and talking and they're about the same for you, I invite you to continue to listen for that balance. So thank you so much for playing with us. Bless you. I think we're... Okay, Lauren, let's hear it for Lauren. Here she comes. I don't know, do you want us to?
Yeah.
Okay, Lauren.
How much time do we have? Okay. So we're going to do some quick introductions. I'm saying that so that our coaches can know that I'm going to come to them and do some introductions. I'll go first. It's good to see you all again. My name is Lauren Feaster, a proud LACCS coach here. My main job is running a women's business association, and I love to keep everything connected. And I think so much of the work that we're doing here is about community. I think some of the biggest mistakes and missteps that we've had in the history of our world have been because we have not made those decisions in community with people who think and breathe and operate and see the world differently. And I think that LACCS is an opportunity for us to do that. And so I'm naming that as an intention because I was invited to have an intention today with Heather. And when I was sharing with my partner, Tiffany, that's something that I want us to really nail this year, is think about how we're stepping outside of our own sectors and schools and really building a community that fosters the work that we're doing. So I'm going to invite all of our coaches to go ahead and give us a brief intro and maybe something that you want to be intentional about this year. So who wants to start? All right, Colin.
Good morning, I'm Colin Jacobs. Really excited to work with the Merrill team as well as the Darrell Lynn Hines Academy team. And this year, especially through that activity, really great reflection that as LACCS coaches particularly, I want to own building a network, playing a role in that, as well as providing the support in all of your different contexts, right? Different schools, and I think about the St. Francis team, they've got 3 schools. Each of those schools has a nuance. Yep, they're one large team, but there's a spirit in each school, and as a coach, we want to support that and help it grow along with the collective, right? So that balance of really differentiating, diving into the details of your context. So I say that to encourage all of you to share today. Share what you want this year to look like, share what you need, give voice to everything we can do to support you.
I'm Katie Hughes. This is my 3rd year here with LACCS. I work for Milwaukee College Prep. I'm a 11-year veteran there, teaching 3rd and 4th grade students, but also the last few years have been the MTSS coordinator there for my district. And as far as for LACCS this year, I'm just really excited to collaborate with you all. I think the work that we're doing here is really intentional and purposeful to provide our students in our community, in our city, what they need to communicate together, whether that's naming values, restorative practices. And so I'm really happy to be here to support you all in that journey. So thank you.
Good morning, my name is Mark Chapin. I'm the principal at Meyer Middle School in River Falls. I'm be working with Eastbrook Academy and Walker. And I've been the lead administrator in the River Falls School District for Character Education. We've been at this for 14 years. I got up at 3:45 this morning. I was out the door by 4, and I'm here in about 4.5 hours. So, yeah, I'm glad to be here this morning. It was a beautiful drive. The sunrise was amazing, so it was pretty cool. Where I'd like to, I know everybody's at a different spot in their journey, and so I just want to meet our schools where they're at because we've been there. So I'd bring my expertise and hopefully help you on your journey.
We're lucky to have you. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Future?
Good morning, good morning. Hi, my name is Future Kane. I am one of the LACCS coaches. Oh, I'm talking to the people. Okay, hi. Do-over. My name is Future Kane. I'm one of the LACCS coaches. I am also the CEO and founder of the Future of SEL, so I work with a lot of schools, colleges, and organizations to help support social emotional learning and employee and workplace wellness. My passion for this stints back when I was in the school district, and we were the first high school to be acknowledged as a state and national school of character in Wisconsin. So that is why I'm passionate. That's why I'm still here doing this work. And I'm excited, and my intention is to seek an understanding from all of you. Because as brilliant as our minds are, they are nothing without your input. So I am here, and we are here to seek an understanding from all of you so that we can help you grow, so that we all could co-create and be intentional with the communities and with the children and with our own wellness and well-being. Thank you so much for being here.
Heather Sattler coming live at LACCS. Thank you so much for playing this morning. I really love that. I feel most at home when I can play, right? Heather Sattler, I've been an educator almost 30 years, and I'm deeply passionate and committed to cultivating spaces for connection and transformation, and working with young people to invite them into their leadership and their strength as restorative practice facilitators and practitioners. And I know the only way that young people they can stand strongly regardless. And in the same breath, our young people stand even stronger when we work to be healthy and connected, to hold the space for them, and then trust them, take steps back, and hold the space and invite them to be in process. So I'm listening deeply for, I was doing this meditation. Tamara Levitt is the person, and she talked about like when you inhale and exhale, there's like a pause. And so I'm listening for those spaces and pause of co-creation and creativity, looking at how do we birth this beautiful work, and where do the voices and spirits of our babies come through all of you as we're co-creating, so that we're really listening and co-creating with them. Dr. J?
Next slide, please. I think we're on the next slide. We on the next slide? I'm gonna get Julie in a minute. Where's Julie? Oh, there's Julie. Boom. There it is. That's not her. That's not her. Look at me over there trying to look like I got it all together. Hi. Hey, everybody. I'm going, see, they did so well, and now I'm going to break it. I'm about to break it. So I'm Ronette. I'm Dr. J, the joyful educator, right? Still third, fourth grade teacher. I'm just telling y'all. That's what this is all about. The Black Miss Frizzle is another name. That happened. And a person that has 8 out of 10 of what we call ACEs. And I'm still working it out. I will say that what I love to do, my intention, I'm a director of innovation and design. I'm Miss Frizzle for LACCS. I have always believed that we need to love our children hard. And I left third, fourth grade, came to, started coaching and then went to post-secondary so that I could try to light fires in other people to love kids hard. And so I work here at Alverno. I teach across all programs in ed division. And I get to build stuff and then other people make it great. So my intention is to bring people together, as many as we can get, more than that's in this room, that believe that something can be done with what we're seeing out there. And it starts with each one of you. I told the table over there, I am good for coffee. If you're like, call doctor, like, I need a doctor, tell them you got a doctor appointment. And I will bring you coffee. I will roll over there or there or there. Really, I will. Don't Google me, because you'll find some stuff out. You're like, they gave her the microphone? I just really love y'all because I need y'all to love them. I'm still working out little Ronette. That's all I got. Whew. Julie. This is my ivory to the ebony.
Good morning. So Ronette is a hard act to follow, right? So I'm Julie Borgelt. I am the administrative director for LACCS, and welcome you all. And excited about another year, another cohort. See some familiar faces who have been here before, and welcome back. So I just want to shout out to a couple of organizations that have really helped us put this program on. WCEP, you see their banner up here, the Wisconsin Character Ed Partnership. They have supported us in this work, and we are grateful for all of their guidance. And you know them, some of you, as the ones that do Promising Practice and State School of Character Awards. And so we work closely with them. I want to give a little shout out to our friends at WCEP. And then LIVS is an organization that is also financially backs this, and I want to thank them. Thank you, LIVS, for helping put this program on, and know that we are continuing this work of character, and you are dedicated to making schools be a place where students and staff and all stakeholders thrive. So thank you to those groups. So anything I can do to make your experience in LACCS better, please reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate any changes that can improve your learning, can improve your community, and I just have this wonderful team of coaches that I'm so privileged to work with, and we work closely together to kind of be reflective and continue to improve the program as we go. So thank you.
Hired last week. And that is literally the best name ever. Oh, Alexis Outlaw.
It's a good name. I will not lie. Pleasure to be here with you all this morning. My name is Alexis Outlaw. I come to you as a proud Alverno graduate. So when we talk about all women's education, I joined this role in the LACCS work as my time here at Alverno. I supported executive recruitment. So my conversation is always, who are we looking for? What do they need? And how can we get them there? And so I'm joining the LACCS team to support more people like you. Dr. J mentioned having the room be full. That is what I'm looking for. I love the city of Milwaukee because I think that there are so many great things, and I always have a deep level of reverence for you all as educators because y'all just do the hard stuff. And so in my 9 to 5, I serve as an assistant professor of business administration and human resources at Mount Mary University, the all other women's college. I'm not a turncoat. I'm still in the same place. I love it. I know, right? Look, I know, right? But my hope in this work and to bring to everyone is this idea that there's a way to be great. And so while I'm an industry professional, being an educator at the college level, I still need to learn how to be a teacher. And so I'm honored to be here with you all because I got a book too. I'm about to learn what y'all are learning. So I can hopefully go create that level of discipleship to make this bigger, better, and greater. So I'm so honored to be here with everyone. And as mentioned, I'm learning as you are learning. So be graceful with me. Thank you for having me.
And here comes Jean. She tried it. You tried it.
Hi, everyone. I prefer behind the scenes. And now I have to follow Alexis. I don't have as much gracious to say, but I really, truly believe that everyone could benefit from character education work, and I'm really happy to be a part of this team and of this group. So thank you all. What's it? Oh.
So take a second to look at our vision and mission. I'm well past the 5 minutes I was given. But here we are. So we have our vision. We envision a world where all students thrive and all communities flourish. We have our mission. We're a student-centered leadership network that champions character education. And this is the point where I check, is everybody in the right place today? Is everybody in the right class? It's because this is like our anchoring piece. So if anybody's like not with this, then we got to figure that out. But my hope too is that you all will figure out the words to make this your own as well, and that you all are proudly declaring that you're a part of this work in all of the spaces you go. And now having Alexis here, every time I look at her, I'm going to be thinking about reminding y'all to be ambassadors for this work to help us expand it. So as you all start to socialize this vision and mission, you'll find your own language. But hopefully we're all anchored on at least this. And this will be important because we're going to be pushed and pulled and stretched all throughout this journey. But if we can anchor back to this vision and mission, we'll know that we're moving in the right direction, okay? The last piece that I wanted to, I just moved someone's slide, sorry about that, is like norms. We're not gonna go through a whole activity on norms, but you all have had the opportunity to hear from all of our leaders, the folks behind the work that are lifting and making this possible. You've had a chance to learn a little bit about each other. Something that, this is again a gift that we're giving to you all. Hopefully you all are at the start of a year establishing norms for your room and your spaces. Something to think about as you do that are these questions. So if we know what we're here to accomplish, the norms should follow. The norms should be a way to equip us to do that. So when we look at our mission and vision at any point when we're starting something new, and it's new, even if it's the same class, it's a new year, it's new people, it's new environment that we're in, the world is changing, so it's important to revisit. But we're thinking about these questions of how should we show up to advance our shared mission and vision, and how does our mission and vision inform our daily actions. So I am going to ask you all to pause for just 30 seconds to think about one like norm that you would want to be true for the way that you interact with this space today. And it could be for you, but a collective norm. So take 30 seconds, think about a norm. You can write it down. And then I'll have one final reflection for you all. All right. So when I did the activity, these were some of the ones that I thought about that I like to use when I'm a part of a space. I'll just use the first one as an example. of one that I really love, because I don't like to be in spaces where we're just talking all the time and then adults are like pontificating about the state of the world, and then we feel all high and mighty because we just had a 3-hour meeting about justice, but we haven't done anything. So my thing is, we can only solve for what we can name. So you all are at the table right now. So you have a special opportunity and responsibility to bring in the voices that aren't. And so we're not going to talk around stuff. That's something that I think would help us to accomplish our goal. Our mission and vision is, if we don't talk around these issues, we just talk through them, and like we really put them out on the table so that we can actually solve for them. So that's an example of a norm that I have. What I'm going to see if you all can do is, these were our group norms that we've had year over year. So my challenge is, can you find a way that the norm that you brought up fits into any of these buckets? And if it doesn't, we'll improve and add to our buckets. But I like to think about what I just shared as a way to be in action. So I put that norm for me in the be in action place. That's how I'm articulating it. Does anybody have an example of a norm that they created that maybe fits or doesn't fit in one of the buckets of the group norms that we've established year over year? Don't be shy. Yes, future. Can I bring this?
One of the things that I think is important is, all of this work comes with emotions. We are emotional beings. So whatever you might be thinking, whatever somebody might be saying, it might make you feel a certain way. Not that that person, whoever said it, is intending to make you feel that. It comes with our own lived experiences and lenses. So for me, I always enter in a space saying all your emotions are welcome and valid. And we as society oftentimes want to numb. So I put it in the present bucket of, we're just asking you to be present with all that it is. If you need a box of tissues, we will get you some. But you, if you are not feeling, it is going to be hard for you to show up healed for your children.
I love that you said that, because my children talks about like just staying, and so that pause practice we did, I think, is a way that we can just stay, but also we need breaks too.
Word.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Paul Takis. Okay. And I hope this answers the question, but like what came to my head is understanding I belong in the room. And so my mother actually helped start this program. So like it's, but me and my mother had, yes it did. But also me and my mother had two completely different paths in life. And I like to say she got a doctorate from Alverno. I got a doctorate from the School of Hard Knocks. And that doesn't minimize what I can add to the room. And I hope that, like, especially in the community that we serve at Greater Holy Temple, we serve a population that's underprivileged. And so learning that my story matters as well, and just being blessed and feeling honored to be in the room with all of you guys as well, and the ability to learn from you guys. So, let's see.
I love that. I see elements of that in the first line of trust, that we're all here for the same reason and we all belong here. I see some other elements too that it fits in. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Okay, my name is Alma Velez, and I am with Pearls for Teen Girls. And one of the things that, and I discussed it in Circle too, is it may be, I don't know where it would fall, but be kind. We want to have those conversations that are difficult, and people are very uncomfortable. So getting uncomfortable is okay. If we are going to, this is what I wrote. Where did I put it? I put, have those difficult conversations to meet our youth where they are. And meeting them where they are doesn't just mean the schools. Just meeting them where they are mentally, physically, emotionally, academically. So for me, be kind as we are kind to each other. That's going to really create change.
Thank you. And one last one. The outlaw. Da-da-da-da-da-da.
I'm happy I get to be last, because I had a friend tell me maybe 4 years ago that when you do anything, you gotta have fun. And so I think a norm around fun, in particular, like you warmed us up, like I was boogieing. I was like, this is fun. So I hope that we create space, because if you think about what we do 9 to 5, like it's stressful. And so the pause to be silly or to share, I think would be very helpful when we talk about norms for this group.
That was great. Thank you. One thing that I value is transparency and good communication. And so I want to be very communicative with you guys right now about what the retreats look like for this year. And Colin's going to help me too, what it looks like during those off months. But if you take a look here at the screen, there are going to be 4 retreats, today included, where we'll have a full day retreat. Today is the only one that's in person. The other ones will be virtual, so you'll log on to a Zoom. Today we'll be with Dr. Kendra Thomas today and in December as well. The one in December will be virtual. And then for February and April, Dr. Maurice will be with us, and he'll do both of those sessions virtual as well. Okay, so those will be full day retreats that we will all log on together to be working together and collaborating with each other. Any questions about that? I know this is this schedule is the same as last year, but I know that there's some new friends here, so I want to make sure that that's pretty clear. And what those full day retreats look like is we'll have the guest speaker in the morning with an engaging activity, and then after lunch you'll have your breakout session. You'll be choosing those today. You'll go through it with your coach of what sessions you would like to attend in the afternoon, and then you will be meeting with your actual coach time as well on those full day retreats. Okay? All right, so you might be thinking, well, what about the days that we don't have a full day retreat? And Colin's going to share that with us right now.
Great, and these slides really serve as a communication tool. So this slide in particular is future communication, and the full day retreats are going to be really, really good. It goes to the next level when we really lean into the time between the retreats, the time you have with your coach, with your team. That turns it into really, really great. Just thinking about past years and teams I've worked with. So later on today, you're going to hear about information for breakout sessions, and those will be a part of the dates you see. And that'll be led by one of the LACCS coaches. So that's really sacred time that you can lean into a number of topics. Okay, so this afternoon you'll hear more, and then you don't have to sign up and it's not written in stone today. You can make some changes based on the topic you may want to learn more about, so you can make a change for January. So we're going to do some logistical things, but today we want to give you all the information you need to just take that next step when it comes to the breakout sessions. Okay, so language-wise in communications, when you see the email from Jean and Julie and it references breakout sessions, it's referring to this 75-minute chunk that's focused on a topic. All right, and then those dates you saw for the breakout sessions, you can see on this timeline to map out the rest of this year. So we have this pattern of full day retreat, kicking it off today, followed by a breakout session, followed by full day retreat, breakout session. So we have this back and forth that really, kicking it off today, the LACCS coaches are really excited to hear about how we can use this framework to best serve you. Okay, so the communication between the full day retreats, that'll be through email, asynchronously, that'll give you what you need, again, to take that next step. So this is really just all the steps for this year in one slide. Okay, any questions you see as we look down the road? Months and months. Julie? Oh, let's put a star by that one. So in that pattern, March 6th will serve as a very special time in the spring. That will be the statewide Character Ed Conference. So good time to galvanize our work for this year, as well as meet some new friends and hear about some new topics in a conference framework, so that there'll be breakout sessions, different breakout sessions, and all these other things on the menu for you to experience on that very special day, March 6th. Future.
I think I was present this whole time. However, can I highlight that coaching happens on all the days, even when we're not here?
Yep. And So all of these dates can serve as time you'll have with your coach. For example, here we are, October 3rd. You'll have time with your team and your coach this afternoon. That can also take place virtually November 7th. And as you build that relationship with your coach or coaches, that can happen anytime. So that door is wide open for you to set up at any time, okay? But we definitely want to build these special times in for the school year because as we know, calendars can fill up, our agendas can get filled, so we want to safeguard these particular times. Thank you, Future. Any other questions or wonderings? All right. And then really this is the layers we want to focus on, but not limit our work to, so that we can, again, support you in the best way possible, yet give you some planning tools because this work is important, and there's a lot of aspects to it. So today we're really going to lean into restorative practices. We're going to hear from Dr. Thomas. It's going to be fantastic. And then through the afternoon, we can unpack that, look further into the future for this year, what your school needs, what your team needs, what you need, and build a plan.
So I'm going to pull up just a little bit, but obviously I'm not going to read all of it because Dr. Thomas is going to give you more information about herself. But I don't know if I'm more excited or if you all are going to be more excited, to be quite honest. So I'm going to read a couple snippets to you, and then she could go and share all the rest. One of the things that stuck out to me is she is committed to using academia for humanitarian efforts to expand the understanding of positive human development in majority world contexts. Her curiosity on justice beliefs has led her to publish on a variety of topics such as parenting practices, school climate, relationships with authority, and positive youth development. And her work has led to her understand justice as a form of capital that is not distributed equally. She is presently working on a project funded by Templeton Ward Charity Foundation to improve peer relationships, character development, social responsibility in Brazilian schools. That's just a snippet. So I'm hoping you will give her a beautiful, warm, joy-filled welcome. Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas, for being on this team this year.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here. I think one of the biggest compliments that that a researcher can get is that something that I'm doing is useful, right? Because there's a lot that feels too abstract and I'm excited to put some legs to the things that I write. And I hope that I leave here with stories that I didn't know before. If something that I say or a graph that I show has a story behind it and fits with something that you do, I would love to hear it. Whether in session, if you want to grab the mic and share an example that fits your life better, because most of the research that I'm showing is from a very different context, a different culture, and different language. And so I would love to learn some stories about how this fits. If this doesn't fit, then it probably needs an edit, and research always needs an edit. And so if it doesn't fit, then I want to hear that too. So I study this because I believe that justice is a powerful motivator of human development. And I think that injustice deflates and justice empowers. And we live in a world with a lot of injustice, and we're teaching children who are experiencing a lot of injustice, right? Childhood is not this like free, happy-go-lucky time. It's a time where these kids are joining a world of pain. And they feel it a lot younger than we think they do, and they understand a lot more than we think they do. That's like the theme in developmental psychology, which is my area, right? Is that they learn things a lot faster and a lot earlier than we think they do. And if you're in this field, then you know that because they come up with like really insightful things. And I'll give a few examples from my background. Here's my background slide. You can see the wonderful people that I live with. That's my son Leo. That's his 5th birthday in July, and my daughter just turned 7 in August. And so I live with little people who say honest things, and my husband tells me honest things all the time too. So the city of Londrina is the city where I'm from. It's a city of 500,000 people, right on the Tropic of Capricorn, about 5 hours west of the city of São Paulo in Brazil, right where Brazil has its waste. That's where I'm from. That's where I was born. I went to Brazilian school growing up. I moved to the United States for college. I went to Taylor University in Indiana, and then I bounced over to and got my PhD in educational psychology at Ball State with an emphasis on human development. I taught at the University of Indianapolis for several years in developmental psychology, and then I moved to Hope College 2 years ago, and I teach developmental psychology there. And so that's a little bit of my background, and I'll dive in a little bit more in Brazil because that's where most of my research has been. And then side note, a lot of my more recent research has been in South Africa because of a college roommate who is South African, and so I've been partnering with a nonprofit there for 9 years. And so the time in December, we'll talk a little bit more about the research there. But today I'll talk and I'll bring you a lot of the research that I've done with partners in Brazil. And so you're probably going to learn a thing or two about the Brazilian school context because I need to tell you the context of the research because research without context is useless. And hopefully that, me telling you a little bit about the context allows you to transfer it to your context, right? And so the Brazilian school system, I grew up with social privilege in Brazil. I grew up attending a private school, and a lot of middle class attends private school in Brazil because that is how poorly funded the public school systems are in Brazil. And so saying that you go to a private school tells you something about social class, but it about 40 to 50% of kids in Brazil might go to a private school of varying degrees with different kind of, with different monthly expenses, right? But some sort of a private school often gives some insight into somebody's ability to pay their bills. And so I grew up in the private school system in Brazil, and you just can't. I grew up in the city. I could point out the city I could point out the apartment building that I grew up in. But in a lot of places around the world, my city included, I couldn't walk a block without seeing somebody that was experiencing homelessness. Or the 7-minute drive from my school to the apartment that I lived at, there would be kids selling candy on the street of my same age, right? And I got to go to the private school, and so when I moved and I went to college, that was one of the very first experiences that I had where I heard people kind of hypothesizing that maybe people who didn't have as much money weren't working as hard. And that was really jarring to me because I grew up with, and not to say that people in Brazil don't think that, but there were a lot of things that I hadn't heard by the time I was 18, and that was one of them. And I was so jarred by that. I think I went to a PhD because of hearing those comments, because I wanted to understand, well, how are people grappling with injustice? Because, I work hard, but I don't clean houses for 10 hours a day and then take the bus home, right? Or I'm not selling candy on the street, and so I'm not working nearly as hard. And where I sit socially has nothing to do really with the amount of hours that I work, not from my worldview. Now, so here's kind of I'm slated for the next 2 hours, but deep breath, we're gonna have 2 breaks, and I hopefully won't have more than 15 minutes talking at you, and then you can kind of talk and give examples at your table or move around. So I'll talk a little bit about this. I call it will slowly get a little bit closer to your reality. So first I'm going to talk a lot more about like research and the perceptions of justice and how that changes in adolescence. And then we're going to talk about a little bit more like justice and injustice in the schools. And then the part 3 will be justice and character education. So we'll slowly build towards the theme of why we're all here. I study perceptions of justice like professionally. And so long before I had kids, I was talking about kids' beliefs or perceptions of justice and how kids probably say it's not fair, right? Raise your hand if in the past week somebody has told you it's not fair. Okay. So I knew that this was a powerful motivator of human development, but when I hear it from my kids, all of a sudden it felt different. It felt like an accusation. And there was nothing about like studying this and writing a dissertation on this that prepared me for the accusation that I felt when my kids said that something was not fair. And sometimes it's absolutely ridiculous. Like it's unfair that they don't have a pool, that I, like there's no scenario that we're gonna get a pool. Like that's not something that we live in Michigan. And so literally go jump in the lake, which is something that I heard growing up, and there wasn't even a lake. But when I hear like, it's not fair, the first thing that I do is I get defensive. Like, how dare you question my benevolent leadership? Like, I am being just here. So I want you, first discussion question, I want you to turn to the people next to you. And I put this in a multiple choice because multiple choice is always a little bit easier than short answer, right? So here's, and these are kind of like pick as many as apply sort of thing. Do you shut down the conversation with a classic line, it's not fair, life's not fair? Do you defend the justice of your action? Yes, it's fair because. Do you call them out for their bad attitudes? That's what I feel like doing the most. Do you listen and address the heated emotions over who got what? Do you distract them because you're too tired for a big life lesson? Or do you want to come up with something else? So turn to the people next to you and talk around these sort of, there's not a single right, that's not the next slide. The next slide is something different. There's not like a right answer. Yes. Whoever the little kid. All right, listen up.
Hello, everyone. Happy Mariah season. Start streaming. I do not have children, like, of myself, so I feel like I only could think of this in my job because that's when I would hear it. I'm also single, so I don't hear it at home from the TV. So it's literally like I literally was thinking like about the first graders that I've taught or I modeled a lesson in pre-K the other day. So I always do a fair versus equal comparison. And I mean, maybe not as much in pre-K, but in first grade and second, I would always ask, would you really want it to be fair? Because then if everyone has the same thing, right, so fair is not the same as equal. So I always frame it in like what is their need? Why do they need that? And so that's fair for them. So that's what I guess I'm other. That's what I try to do like in a tier 1 whole class so that we can then refer to that throughout the year.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah.
I think I fall more on the other scope. I have 2 kids. They're 14. Well, I have 3, but 28, 14, and 12. And my 14 and 12-year-old, honestly, I don't think I've been in a situation where it's not fair because the older gives into the younger one a lot of times. But I also think it's because in my situation as a single mother, and a lot of things are unfair. So guess what? I just suck it up. And they've seen that. So when they encounter things that are not fair, sometimes they're just like, they find a solution in a different way. So, but I hear this from even staff, or young girls that we, sometimes it's just not fair, and I want to applaud them because, like, hey, good for you. You're raising your voice, but also, I just wanted to bring a different perspective to that because I want my children to raise their voices instead of just kind of giving in to, yes, the status quo.
Hi, I have 2 children as well, 17 and 8. So I hear it's not fair from more of an age perspective. My younger wants to do the things that the 17-year-old does, and sometimes I think that she thinks that she's 17 because they're very close, but they're so far in age. So I do hear, like, it's not fair, why can't I do, and then fill in the blank on everything she wants to do as a teenager, and she's 8. So, and then the older will say, well, you didn't have that lackadaisical, like, you were so mean to me when I was growing up, and why are you so, like, letting the little one do all of these? And I'm like, well, I've grown as a parent, and so you realize, you grow up and you're like, it's not that deep, and you just pick your battles, and you get older, you just let certain things go by. But how I marry the two with the it's not fair conversation, I love to hear them out. Because I appreciate hearing their perspectives on things. But then I always go to, okay, what is the solution? Do you want to just be heard? Because I'm here for that. Or do you want me to work with you on a resolve? Like, how do you want to address that so that we can move forward and go on with our business, whatever we're doing in the day? So, thank you.
Thank you. So, one of the things that I've done all of these, and I've done other things too. But justice is a really deep topic, right? And so I've also pontificated on equity versus equality, and then realizing that their follow-up question is are we going to the candy store? And so they're completely out, they're not interested anymore, right? And so trying to hit the right tone is an art, and it's an elusive art. But the main idea that I hope you walk away from is that they need practice talking about these things. And so if it is the right time to talk about, well, is it fair or is it equal? And let's talk about the difference between that, right? If it is the right time just to listen. But they need practice talking about this because it's an abstract concept that's really important for them to go deeper on. And abstract concepts are harder. And as a kind of a side funny story, 2 weeks ago, well, I guess about a month ago when school started, my kids are still in different schools because my son is going to join kindergarten next year, but he's at a school that has a pre-K program, and they end at the same time, and there's not a bus system, and so I have to go and pick up both kids and be at 2 places at the same time, but it's a small city, so I can kind of do that. I thought I could, and then so I decided I'll pick up my daughter first, and I'll go pick up my son. And just the process of it, I was about 3 blocks away when the school office called me and said, do you know that there's pickup? Yes, I know there's pickup. I'm on my way. I'm 32nd and Pine. I'll be there soon. So sorry. And I just hung up the phone, and I'm in the car. My daughter's in the back seat, and I said, this is so embarrassing. And she said, what's embarrassing? And I was trying to explain what embarrassing was, and she wasn't following. And then we pull up, and an adult walks my tiny little kid to the car, and my daughter in the back seat goes, oh, embarrassing, I get it. Yep, we're acting it out so you can understand this abstract concept. And so with abstract concepts, sometimes we need to they're going to experience it, right? But if we don't shut it down, and if we allow them some space to talk about, and maybe it is, they feel like it's unfair that they don't have a pool or they don't get tablet time, but actually being able to okay, this is a conversation we could talk about. We're taking them to a deeper level. And that's an important part of them being able to grapple with it. because character is usually centered around principles of justice and care. And so if we can allow them, right, usually the way character is defined is around principles of justice and care. And so that allows for a scaffolding of character if we have a foundation of justice. And what is justice? And that's not going to be learned overnight. But that conversation is laying a foundation for character. So if you have a sheet of paper and a pen, if you don't, just grab it. There's some things there. I want you to write down a few numbers because I think it will be a little bit easier for you to follow some of the research slides if you can practice on your own. I am not going to ask anybody to share these numbers. But I'm going to ask you kind of on a scale of 1, strongly disagree, to 6, strongly agree, so you can see the scale up top. And I'm going to ask you to rate yourself on these, because this is what often we'll do with adolescents when we're understanding, trying to research their perceptions of fairness. We'll ask them these questions. And so for you to understand what their answers mean, I want you to kind of put yourself as a what do I believe. That way, when I show you the next slides, you can understand what some of the numbers mean. So if I asked you on a survey, you're not going to share these numbers, how much you disagree, 1, to agree, 6, on these statements. Please write down 3 numbers, 1 for each. Justice always prevails over injustice. People usually get what they deserve. Basically, the world's a fair place. Write a number down for each one of those. 1 is strongly disagree, 6 is, so if you completely agree with those statements, you would put 6, 6, 6. If you completely disagree with those, so somewhere between that. Justice always prevails over injustice. People usually get what they deserve. Basically, the world's a fair place. Now I want you to look at these 3. I am usually treated fairly. Overall events in my life are just. I usually get what I deserve. Rate those. If you have those 3 numbers, I'd like you to get an average for each one. How do you average the first 3? And then what's your average for the second 3? I want you to think, how far apart are they? Are they the same? Is one higher? Which one's higher? These are just reflect on this. Now I want you to reflect on what would you think about somebody else if they scored really highly on the first? If you don't know anything about somebody, but you know that they score really highly on the first, what would you think about them? What would you think about them if they scored really low on the first? What would you think about them? These are just reflections. And then what would you think about them if they scored really highly on the second? Or if they scored really lowly on the second? When I look at surveys, one of the things that I'm really curious about is, do they rate them the same or are they different? And which one's higher? Those are some questions that I think are really interesting to me. And what I've done in research that I've read and research that I've conducted is, how do these relate to trust in democracy, being bullied, victim blaming, cooperation, rule breaking, bullying others, intervening, courage? All right, what are some, if justice is a part of character, what do I have to believe? Because really what these questions are asking is, what's your expectation of justice in the world? And that's kind of a paradox, right? Because if I just look at this, we're going to call that general justice, or a general belief that the world is just. And there's something about general justice, about believing that the world justice always prevails over injustice, that's correlated with victim blaming. Because we're trying to fill in the blank of something that I cannot control. And so it was first studied in the 1960s with experiments with college students, of course, where some students were told there was a lottery, and some students randomly won something. And then other students were interviewed and say, how deserving was this person? And their peers typically said, oh yeah, I'm really glad that that person got it. You know, they deserved it. Even though everybody knew it was a lottery. But we tend to look at things and think, that fits. We assimilate, right? We're trying to make sense of it. And then the flip side, they had an experiment where people were like randomly like shocked for oh, you have to learn something, and if you don't learn it, we're going to do this conditioning experiment where you get like a really low voltage. And of course, it was an actor and all that. But what they found is that when, there was a hard task, and so the actor keeps getting zapped. Of course, the person doesn't know it's an actor. And then afterwards, the person who was in charge of giving the punishment was asked, what did you think of the person? But they were split into two groups. One group, they were able to say, hey, pay the person who was learning, right? Pay the victim. And the person was allowed to say, hey, thank you so much for participating. Sorry about that. It was for research, right? And then the other one, they weren't allowed to do that. They just didn't have any contact and were just asked to rate the person. The people who were allowed to pay the victim didn't blame the victim. The people who were not allowed to blame the victim were more likely to say, man, they couldn't catch on. They didn't learn it, right? And so there must be something about, because when we don't have the power to establish justice, we establish it in our minds, and that's how we blame the victim, because we want justice. And so this theoretical framework has explained victim blaming through the lens of justice is so important, and it's something we long for as humans so much, that we attempt to establish justice cognitively when we have no power. And so one of the ways to reduce victim blaming is giving people something to do about it, because then they don't feel so threatened, because we tend, and I'll say we as humans, because hopefully there's something in your life that you can identify with the worst parts of humanity. You have that part in you, and you understand that there's something about that you can identify with both the most beautiful moral acts, but you also understand how you're not too far from doing the same thing under the similar circumstances, right? That's my perspective on a lot of psychological research. This kind of sums up a lot of the research. Little fish says there's no justice in the world, and the medium fish says there's some justice in the world, and the big fish says the world is just. I saw this, Bob Mankoff did this, is the cartoonist that did this. And this cartoon appeared in my social psychology textbook in college, right at the time that I was hearing some of those comments about blaming the poor. And that is like, I want to study that. I want to study that. And so that was, and I want to study that in my home culture. And so my dissertation was giving surveys, asking these questions to Brazilian adolescents, because I was trying to make sense. Does this happen in my hometown too? Does this? How are people making sense of it? The other side, we're going to call that personal justice. I'm usually treated fairly. I usually get what I deserve. Isn't that what we want for our kids? There's something beautiful about that, right? It's not just about victim blaming. There's something about power. There's something about agency. There's something about, I want my children to think, to get what they deserve. I want them to see that if they work harder, they get more. That's just, right? I want them to be led by teachers and be raised by parents that try to give them justice, that try to make that within reach, because injustice deflates and justice empowers. And so there's a lot of research that has shown that this personal justice is associated with motivation, with working hard. And so it is a paradox, and it's associated with well-being, right? Because if you are rating, I usually get what I deserve, a 1, and that says something about the challenge and about the injustice of your environment and of your life. And that's not something I wish on other people. So it's a paradox, which I think keeps me researching, right? I drive a really old car, and the sound system didn't work, so I bought a new sound system just so I could like listen to CDs and the radio. And the volume dial, I don't know if this was something in the installation or whatever, but the volume dial, I have to like rotate it like 5 or 6 times just to go a little bit louder, and then all of a sudden it goes on Bluetooth and it gets really loud, and I like have to like spin it 8 times for it to go back down, which I think says something more about my car and my sound system than anything else. But there's something about the sensitivity of that, what I'm going to call the effort-effect pipeline, right? Where you have to do so much more just to get a little bit. And other people, they just have to touch it, and it just goes, right? And so there's something about being able to see the fruit of your labor that feels just, that feels fair. If a student works a little bit harder and they see that reflected in a test, that feels like they have control, right? And that's processed a little bit like justice. So these justice beliefs, they serve an assimilation and a coping mechanism, right? That I might, if the only way that I can establish justice is by doing a little cognitive gymnastics, then that's an assimilation. It might be a coping mechanism, because if I think that this teacher is going to treat me fairly, then that's the assumption that I bring to the classroom, and that's probably an assumption that you hope your kids bring, that you earn that trust, right? That they assume that there's some sort of justice, because why would I stand up for somebody else if I think it's not going to matter? Right? And so there's something about standing up to a bully that the kids who are most likely to intervene in that sort of situation are the kids who score higher on personal justice, because they think they can make a difference. And if somebody scores so low, they might not think they can make a difference. So you can see how the threads go all the way to character education, right? That internal locus of control, that I have some sort of a power. The general beliefs about justice also say a lot about their expectations and about their social contract, right? Because why would I establish a social contract if I don't belong in the group? And people who think that they are, people who are treated unfairly, they don't feel like they belong. And so there's no reason to establish a social contract if I don't belong to the group, right? And so it's this paradox of I need to believe in justice in order to get out of bed in the morning, but most kids are growing up in contexts of injustice. Around the world, most kids are growing up in contexts of injustice, right? And so how do we study that? And how do we help them make sense of it? So one of the probably the only research that I've collected in the United States was with a graduate student in Indianapolis, and she went to several high schools, several middle schools in Indianapolis, and asked questions. And the middle schools were predominantly in low resource areas, didn't have a lot of funding compared to other schools. And what they found, and this is just personal beliefs about justice, so I typically get what I deserve, those sort of questions, that among students who self-reported in lower socioeconomic statuses, it didn't really matter if they self-identified as a minority or a majority student. But the students who were in higher, this is all self-report, who self-reported in higher socioeconomic statuses, then we did see a difference, right? And the students who said that they were in the majority group and who were high socioeconomic status, that's where they said, oh, actually, my world's a little bit more fair. And so we see some interaction effects here. This is data that I collected in Brazil with low, middle, and high. They self-identified as one of those 3 categories. And in green, we see the my life is fair, and in yellow, we see the world is fair. And so if you're just looking at the green, we kind of see a very mild slope up. And most students were saying, a little bit, right? They're not saying, no, it's completely unfair, it's complete. We're really talking about the difference between a 3 and a 4, just to say. So there was a pretty mild positive relationship. And kind of what's interesting is that the slope kind of went the other direction, if we were talking about general, is that the students who were in the highest socioeconomic statuses, those were the ones that said, actually, the world's not that fair. But what I came away from that in is the distance between them. That there was something about the students who had more income in their family that were able to distance themselves a little bit more from the injustice of the world. Right? And I thought that the absolute value was maybe less interesting to me than how much they were able to distance themselves. And I saw that distance as like a buffer. Like, I know the world's not fair, but I typically am treated fairly. I typically get what I deserve. And I started seeing that buffer, but this was cross-sectional research. It was just in just in 3 schools. And so I partnered with the University of São Paulo, and they had a 4-year longitudinal study on legal socialization. And I kind of met them right before their second, and so I got to ask these questions to these Brazilian 12-year-olds, then 13-year-olds, then 14-year-olds. And it was a representative sample of this really unequal city. City where my mom is from, where my dad spent some time there too growing up. It's where my grandparents lived. And it's really affluent city with a lot of inequality. And so this is, looking at all 3 years, I did a cluster analysis of just seeing, like, what are the profiles of justice beliefs? So not really looking at group differences, but just saying, like, what are all the different kinds of beliefs out there? I clustered them. And then there were 5 clusters, and I put them in a privilege order. If we just look at what's the average income in each cluster, what's the demographic makeup from an ethnicity perspective, from a public and private school, because private schools are typically, let me say this about private schools. They typically have toilet paper, and the teachers typically show up. That's kind of what my cousins who went to public schools, their teachers often didn't show up. There would be month-long strikes. And so a school that's supposed to start in February, because that's the beginning of the academic calendar, might start in March. Or there might not be toilet paper because people are taking the toilet paper home with them, right? And so when I'm saying the difference between public and private, we're talking sometimes about the difference of having a teacher that shows up and feeling like you belong, like somebody cares about you enough to teach you, and not that those teachers care a lot about the student. They're trying to do everything, right? It's just so, there's just a very low infrastructure that would support public education. And so looking at these 5 groups, and if I ordered them based on the amount of social power that those groups represented, the most affluent group with the highest income level was predominantly self-identified as white. I don't want to spend too much time talking about there's a lot of different, the ethnicities categories in Brazil are a different social construction. So you can kind of use some of the same heuristics, but they're a bit different. Highest income, highest rates of private school, and highest rates of students who would identify in the majority white group. And then if we ordered them in order of kind of these broad categories of social power, red is how fair is your life, and blue is how fair is the world in general. And so the group with the most social power was the one that had the biggest buffer, right? And throughout, when they were 12, when they were 13, and when they were 14, it stayed high, and the blue just kind of kept going down. As they learned more about the world, yeah, this world is unfair. And as I want you to pay attention, especially to the gap. Because as I looked at the gap, and the group that was actually had a negative gap, right, actually said, actually, everybody else has it better. I look at that and I think, like, of the students saying, you know what, this world that you're talking about, like, that's the world that I live in. Like, I live in, I am the 99%, like that sort of, that was the group that was predominantly female, with the lowest income, most public education, and most identified in the minority group. And that they were actually saying, actually, the world's more fair for everybody else than it is for me. The world's less fair for me. I have less access than the regular, than whatever's average. And if we just looked at 12-year-olds, so this is just 12-year-olds, and the fact that they can do this with the amount of sociological accuracy, that stuns me. That the first few bars are this is a self-identified ethnic category, and this kind of aligns with the frequency of it, right? Is that the students who self-identified in the smallest groups were the ones who said, actually, the world's more fair for everybody else. I'm actually going to put myself in the negative category. And then the public and private schools. Public schools, they typically said either made no difference or said between the personal and the general, right? How fair is the world and how fair is my life? And this is the income bracket, and this is not self-identified income anymore. We asked their parents, what is the family income? And this is the most linear graph I have ever created in my academic career. Usually things are not linear, and this is the most linear. And so, and this is, just to remind you, I'm talking about the difference. And so if you look at your piece of paper, what's the difference? And the highest means my life is more fair than everybody else's life. And negative means actually the world's more fair for everybody else than it is for me. I'm in the worst situation, right? And if we split it across, let's see, I'll speed up a little bit. The point is, I think when people are writing down these numbers, they're saying something about what they've experienced. And they're saying something not just about what they expect, but they're telling me something about where they've been, right? And it's good to be a little distant from the injustice of the world. We want, I think a commonality in this group is that we want to create a buffer. We want the school to be a buffer of maybe some injustices that our students are facing, right? We want the home to be a buffer of the injustices that are out there. Because there's something good about being a little distant. It gives them a little bit more power, right? Because injustice deflates and justice empowers. I don't want my kids to grow up thinking that the world's fair, but I want them to expect justice, because expecting justice is the only way that they'll demand it. And so our job as teachers, as parents, as mentors, as coaches, as just good adult citizens, is we have to strike the balance between saying the world's not fair, but you better expect justice. And that's a really complex thing. And so when somebody's saying that's not fair, and they might be saying that's not fair for some really ridiculous reason, or they might be right on and you might know that that is not fair and there's nothing you can do about it. Do you say there's nothing you can do about it? Do you rob that person of their agency? Or is that the right thing to say in the moment because that means you're listening? And that's a judgment call, right? And that's really hard to make, but you can make it if you're in relationship and you actually know the person. Then you might know if the right thing to do is say you're absolutely right and there's nothing you can do about it. But in a different context, saying there's nothing you can do about it might be robbing them of their sense of urgency and power that they need to be able to change the world, right? So that's our tall order. The studies that I showed are kind kind of an overview, but a lot of other samples that I've gotten in other places have kind of sang the similar chorus, and has led me to think about justice as a form of capital that's not distributed equally. And I suggested that there are 5 dimensions to what I'm going to call justice capital, right? Because in an academic framework, most researchers are looking at these questions from a coping mechanism, which is important, but it's also important not just to say the belief in justice, but also the access to justice. Because most of it is studied as a belief, which it is, it's a belief, but it also says something about where they've been. And so I would say that status, which is most of the research that I've shown you, like a status of being in the majority or minority, a status of having more or like money to buy security, to buy insurance, to buy transportation, right? That there's a status part of having justice and having access to justice in an unequal world. There's a status component to that, right? It's a lot. Some groups have a lot more reason to fear the police than others, right? Some groups, if you can hire a lawyer, then you might be a lot safer from an injustice than if you can't hire a lawyer. If you can purchase insurance, then you might be a lot safer, a lot more buffered from tragedies than if you can't. And so there's a lot of layers that matter for justice, and status has a piece of that. I don't think it's the only piece. And I'll give you the other examples. There's that effort-effect pipeline. There are some jobs where working harder means more money. And if I'm going to say that we're all teachers in this room, that's not one of the jobs, right? That working harder usually doesn't mean more money. Now, it means there's a lot of other things, right? If I could do a really good job for my students, if I give them that like personalized feedback, and if I sit with them in moments of there is purpose that comes in, and there is change that comes in it. And so we're powerful, maybe not rich, but we are powerful in affecting change and in driving purpose. But there's that effort-effect pipeline that some people can work a little bit harder and see a little bit of a difference, right? But if you are a student that has a learning disability, you can work a little bit harder and not see any difference. And that feels unfair, right? That experience is an experience of injustice. There's a piece of voice that comes in. If a student has the ability to self-advocate, that gives them a little bit more justice, right? And so I see some students, and I see this in the college perspective of, I try to be really mindful about the students that ask for things, that ask for, I'll never give a single student an opportunity for extra credit just because they asked. Because somewhere in that classroom is a student that did not ask, that would like it, but they see themselves a little bit more, it's more of a power distance culture, and you don't ask, right? My husband talks about probably he was in a small enough school that he really thinks he was cut out of several $1,000s of a scholarship because it was something about like being in the top 10%, and it was actually his buddy who was in the top 10%, not him. He was right on the cusp, and he attributes it to a letter grade difference in a class that his friend asked for, and he didn't ask for. And he thinks that cut and his friend had a lot more money and didn't need as many scholarships. But there's that something about that self-advocacy that matters, that we have to teach students to self-advocate. And if there's a student with a stutter or from a culture that has a greater power distance and doesn't want to ask for things, that's a different access to justice, right? And so, and then there's something about proximal authorities, right? There's teachers and parents. We can buffer the injustice of the outside, that the world is unfair, but sometimes teachers and parents, they stand in the gap and they provide a little bit more of a buffer. Or in an adult world, I think about the amount of justice that a boss or a manager can provide. I can think about circumstances where a manager was just really complacent, and there was one person that was really ruining the group environment and taking all of the credit for something or not contributing at all to something. And if the manager does nothing, that gives a different vibe of fairness, right? And there's a lot of research that's done in organizational settings, and organizational justice is really key to belonging, and it's really it's really important for not burning out. And so in an adult atmosphere, my examples are typically with youth and children because that's where I research. But there's something about the authority that's in that context that's a really important perspective on giving people access to justice or not. And then lastly, a society, because if you're in a society with a lot of injustice, you can have a really great umbrella, and it's just more likely, right? If you're in a city that has a lot of violence, you can have all of the layers to protect yourself, but it's just more likely if that's your context. And so there's a level of a societal dimension of that. Social mobility matters, and inequality in your context matters. And a lot of this is completely beyond the control of teachers and parents. But this is, when I talk about justice capital, this is kind of how I framed it, right? And so I'll circle back to this later because I want to, at a different point in our conversation today, after we come back from break, I want you to try to come up with examples of where do you see this in your context, right? There's something about procedural justice. So if we actually get in, those items don't really say too much about what is justice, right? We're just kind of saying, well, what's your gut reaction to the sentence of, I typically get what I deserve? What's your gut reaction? We're really not talking about what deserve is and if fair is the same thing as equal. But if we start breaking down some of the other literature around justice, there's distributive justice. Does everybody get the same thing, right? Equal. And then there's something called procedural justice, which is the process. How are you treated? Because if everybody gets the same thing, or distributive justice, and that doesn't even have, distributive justice can actually be more equity, not so much equality. So equity and equality, is everybody getting the same thing? Is everybody getting what they deserve, right? Or getting what they need? But then there's that piece, which is distributive justice. There's also procedural justice, which has 4 pillars: voice, transparency, impartiality, and respect. Were you treated justly? Because people who are not treated justly, they might agree with their outcome, but they are outraged by the process, right? Let's say you get a speeding ticket. Were you speeding? Yes. But you are outraged. Why? Because you were not treated justly, right? There's a justice treatment process. On the flip side, if you are treated justly during that process, you might not, let's say you got the speeding ticket and you know that you deserve the speeding ticket, but you were treated justly. Or let's say the other way. You got the speeding ticket, you don't think you deserved it, but the whole process was so cordial that you can swallow it, right? And then there's another piece where the whole process is not cordial at all, and so you just can't get over it. Even if you agree with the distributive justice part, you don't agree with the procedural justice, and that's a harder pill to swallow because it says something about your humanity, right, and your sense of belonging to the group. So voice, transparency, impartiality, and respect. When this is studied in a teacher, as a teacher, like does your teacher give you procedural justice or does your parent give you procedural justice? These are how it's usually operationally defined in a survey. Do they, if they found out, so usually the premise is something like this. If your teacher found out that you did something wrong, do they give you a chance to tell you your side of the story? That's voice. Do they explain to you why they're calling your attention? That's transparency. Do they hear all sides of the story before making their decision? That's impartiality. And do they speak to you respectfully? Right? That's respect. And so procedural justice, we've asked this question to students about their family and about their school. And when the questions about procedural justice look like this: do they listen to you? Do they let you tell your side of the story? Do they talk to you respectfully? Do they give you a chance to talk? And what research has found is that people who perceive procedural justice, they're more likely to give legitimacy to the authority. And then they're less likely to engage in rule-violating behavior. That's the acronym, rule-violating behavior, right? Because sometimes rule-violating behavior has nothing to do with consequences. Because you know what? They don't care about consequences sometimes. Like, there's nothing about, they don't actually want to stay in your classroom, so they're not too worried if you ask them to leave, right? Sometimes the consequences don't matter too much. But what really matters is that the procedural justice gives legitimacy, and this has been found a lot in research on the police, that the legitimacy usually doesn't come from procedural justice, it comes from beliefs about procedural justice. Is the respect, is the voice, is the impartiality, is the transparency there? Because that, even if I don't agree with your decisions, that usually brings legitimacy. And people don't follow rules because of consequences. People follow rules because they legitimize the authorities. I want to say that again because I don't think that's understood enough in how we provide rewards or consequences. People usually don't follow rules because of consequences. They usually follow rules that they think are good rules, that they think are legitimate rules. And so when we're trying to foster rule behavior, we really need to establish the legitimacy of authority. And that's something that can't be demanded, it has to be given. Legitimacy cannot be demanded, it has to be given, it has to be earned. And it's usually earned through justice, and especially through procedural justice. So, it's my last academic-y piece, and then we're going to get to a little bit more discussion. But research with this same group of adolescents in Brazil, we found that parents' procedural justice and the justice of the school, that predicted how they thought about the world and how they thought about their own lives. And how they thought about their own lives and how they thought about this, the world influenced how they thought about the law, how they legitimized the law. And so just to put a little bit more skin on it, we asked questions like, the school rules, when the school rules are disobeyed, the consequences are fair. When students said that, yeah, that's true, they're more likely to think that the law is legitimate. Because most adolescents don't have direct contact with judges, with police. If they do, then they're usually in a more vulnerable category. Because usually those experiences don't come pleasantly. And so usually they're in a more vulnerable category, but they're still creating ideas about democracy, about the justice system, about law enforcement based on the experiences of proximal authorities that they do have. Parental procedural justice, would your parents talk to you politely if they discovered you did something wrong? Is there some basic respect that happens in that process, right? And that influenced how they thought about their world, how they thought about their own life, and how they thought about the world. And the law legitimacy, these are questions like, laws are good for the country. Kind of the opposite of that would be legal cynicism, right? And then rule violating behavior is, since last year, have you engaged in theft or vandalism, or piracy, or drugs, or cheating? Piracy sounds a little different in English than it does in Portuguese. We're talking about like selling DVDs on the corner, that sort of thing. That's not what my 5-year-old would think if he was looking at this slide right now. So I came across this right here. What do principals really do? He says the announcements and then he eats the donuts. The parenting analogy is that my sister said she has 3 boys. My sister said her boys think that she just eats marshmallows all day. And I told my sister, you know what? If that's what they're thinking, then just do it. Like, that's what they. The point is, the way that we are perceived matters. Because if we are, let's say, that behind the scenes, I'm doing the right thing for every student, but they are just seeing some unequal treatment. They don't know all the different realities. They're just seeing unequal treatment. If that's the story they're telling themselves, you're losing a part of the battle. And so I hesitate saying that because the opposite is like, well, just put up the front and make them believe everything. Like, this doesn't actually work either because kids are really smart and they catch on a lot more, a lot earlier than we think we do. That's the theme, right, of developmental psychology. But the way that we're perceived matters. Last summer, I went to a conference, and the keynote speaker of the conference on study of justice was a justice from The Hague, from the international courts. And he said that this isn't, I think this quote, I looked it up, and it comes from somewhere else, but he introduced me to this quote. And he said the motto is that justice has to be seen to be done, because the international courts, like, they are only powerful if they are legitimized. If other people look at that and think, yeah, that's a legitimate judge. And so they have, at least the cases that he presided over, he talked about the great lengths that they went through when prosecuting war crimes, to make sure that the people in that community had a radio or a feed or something that they could watch, or flying in certain people and making sure that people in the community could see people testifying, because there's a really important piece to being able to see justice. And if you can't see justice, then it's not legitimate. Justice has to be seen to be done. And then there's an art to doing that if you're in a classroom and you don't want to put a student on display, right? And so there's a whole art to doing this, but having students feel justice and see justice is really important to them feeling like they belong. Because, principle number 4, I told you we'd get there, every school creates a caring community where everyone feels they belong. And when you feel like you're treated unfairly, you feel like you don't belong, right? And when you feel like you're treated fairly, you feel a part of the group. And so that perception piece is important. They need to feel safe. And so practices that we do where they don't feel safe, that's threatening, because you can't learn in a classroom where you don't feel safe. You can't learn in a classroom where you don't feel fairly treated. So if I want to come back here and say that B could be done poorly, it also could be done well. Defend the justice in my actions. Yes, it is, because I'm, maybe not. But explaining why you accepted somebody else's late work, but you're not accepting your late work, that explanation matters for your legitimacy and for their sense of belonging. That explanation matters. So obviously you could do this in a really horrible way where you lose legitimacy, but you could do this in a really lovely way where they now feel like they're buying in to a virtue of the classroom. So every school creates a caring community where everybody feels like they belong. So I want to pause right here and take a little break. And you can get another muffin, a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom, and we'll start back again in 10 minutes. Good. Bring your attention back to what do we know about the research of justice beliefs in the school? And a lot of research has said that how fair children believe their world is related to how fair they think their teachers are, or how fair they think the school rules are, their sense of belonging in the group, how much they adhere to group rules. If they have higher grades, people who think that their life is fair usually have higher grades. This is just kind of a snapshot of some of things that justice beliefs are correlated with in the school system. But the schools influence it, right? They're both driving and receiving these beliefs. And so I called the talk today, Justice Fosters Character, the Restorative Role of Schools. But if I was going to be a little bit more cynical, I could have also called it this: Injustice Erodes Character, the Exacerbating Role of Unfair Schools, right? I don't think that would be as interesting. It's like, everybody, let's come here and talk about how injustice erodes character and how schools can exacerbate that. But if we think about things like zero tolerance policies or the school to prison pipeline, like there's ways that schools aren't just neutral. Schools are harmful. And we're all here because we believe that schools can help uplift, that they can provide a buffer from injustices in the world, that they can be a place that students can taste justice, and so they'll be empowered to pursue it, right? That's what we believe. One of my good friends from childhood, she's a psychologist in Brazil. When we were like freshmen in high school, she would do my nails, and I would take notes, like in class. And then I would tutor her after class because she would not pay attention in class. And so she is now a really, really wonderful psychologist. So we both kind of diverged and then converged again. And she told me one story when she was working with an inmate. He had been I forget the details of his story, but he had committed a crime, and she was there to provide some mental health counseling to him, and so she decided just any way to get him to talk, and so they ended up doing a book club, and they would read a book together that kind of she chose that was alongside him, and it was about justice. And that's kind of what their sessions would be, is they would talk about injustice. And that's kind of the direction that he guided. And she told me that one time, I was telling her the things that I was studying, and she said, "Oh, that's so interesting." And she told me the story that stuck with me. She said, when I was talking to him, he made some sort of comment in one of their sessions that if he had been in the United States, this wouldn't have happened. And she pushed back. And she said, if you had done this in the United States, you would certainly be in jail. And he said, I would have never done that in the United States. And not strip away anything you know or anything you think or any cynicism you have about this country. And I want you to think that from his perspective, he's looking at the United States as a place of opportunity, right? And he's looking at the United States from some wonderful things, especially in contrast. And so I don't want you to think about what would have happened to him had he been in the United States. I want you to think that he was hypothesizing of being in a different context, and he was saying that he, exactly the way he is, would have done something different in a different context. And I think there's something powerful and true about that the context does drive how much we buy into the group and how much we engage in the group and our social contract with the group. And when we are in a context of injustice, that does influence our behaviors, that it does influence how much we might agree with group rules or violate group norms. And if I can just zero in again on the difference that we found between private and public schools, and say that there's something about schools that it's not just a different setting. So there are some of our students, they actually feel safer at school than they feel at home, right? And so it can provide a social context that's a haven at its best. Let's talk about schools at its best. At its best, schools can offer a social haven and a place where they feel safe. And I hope our schools do that. But they can also offer opportunity. And I know that there's a lot of places where this doesn't happen and where it is imperfect and where schools can exacerbate inequality. Higher education is a well-known culprit of that, right? That some institutes of higher education drive debt, other places drive opportunity and give students a network. And so schools can also exacerbate inequality. But let's talk about where schools can, our realm of power is that schools can also provide opportunity by academic empowerment. Providing students with academic skills and cognitive skills can be a place where you're giving them power to launch themselves in, to write that email, to get that internship, to study for that test. And so I think the school, principle number 6, the school offers a meaningful and challenging academic curriculum that encourages all students to develop their character strengths. I see that in both ways. I see that in some ways there's an academic curriculum for character strengths, but I also see that of pushing students to thrive and cognitively to really learn how to dissect an argument and really learn how to conquer math. And really, you are empowering them to get more justice capital. Because when I think about a younger version of myself, didn't have the voice that I do now, didn't have the experiences that I do now. I have more access to justice now than I did when I was 12. Absolutely. Wonderfully. Yes, I do. And part of that story is through education. And so I don't differentiate the character curriculum from the professional or the cognitive curriculum, because those are also really important pieces. I think this is the last research slide that I have, and then we can talk a little bit more about the character piece. But this is with 18,000 students in public schools in southern Brazil. So something that came up during the break that I really wanted to emphasize is that when I'm talking about my data are predominantly from southern Brazil, which is about 70% of the students in these cities would self-identify as white. Now, white is a different social construct than it is in the United States, but just to kind of give a framework, when, talking about Brazil as a whole is different than talking about like these specific cities in southern Brazil. We asked a lot of questions about rule fairness, school safety, and all of that. So in your turn to somebody else and read those 9 squares, and I want you to just hypothesize, what do you think predicted how fair they thought the school was, how fair they thought their life was? So those questions of like, I typically get what I deserve. We asked a large battery of questions about school climate, and I'm gonna pick out, all of them were predicted how fair they thought their life was. But just real quick, turn to somebody else, and I want you to hypothesize before I tell you. What do you think was most predictive of how they rated the fairness of their life? So no matter what you said, I can give you credit for it, right? You got the right answer because they all were important to some extent. But across age groups, the three strongest statistical predictors were rule fairness, peer relationships, and social-emotional learning. So here's where I want to say your relationships and social-emotional learning matter a lot. And I was like, interesting, because those wouldn't have been the ones that I would have picked. But that's the most interesting part of research, is that you get to be wrong. And as I reflected on it, I thought students that are continuously exposed to a context that they don't connect with, and that they aren't brought in by, because good socio-emotional learning is good listening, and good, it's just, it's good anger management, it's good listening, it's not very punitive. Those are actually felt as more justice. And so it goes to a little bit more of the procedural justice being especially important, and being a place where you have friendships, right? Being a place where because people are the best thing until they're the worst thing, right? There was, I did a qualitative study, and I'll talk a little bit about this more in December because it's the project that's in South Africa, and it's on hope. And we asked, like, what gives you hope? And one of the main pieces that came out is relationships. Relationships drive hope. But that went both ways. Relationships crush hope, right? And it's the people who suck the life out of hope, and it's also the people that uplift and support you in the hope. And so I think that also works for justice, is that the relationships matter, and they matter both ways. They also make you feel really small, really powerless, right? And they also make you feel really safe. And so the relationships matter. I have started thinking that A might not be the best approach. Because when we shut down the conversation with life's not fair, there's a piece of power that gets robbed. And even though I think A is true, I also don't think it's the best answer, because it's usually a conversation ender. Unless you want to actually open that up and actually talk about it. But if it's a conversation end, then it's shutting down something, and it might be robbing something of something they need to say in the process. I do like my father-in-law's full quote, which is, life's not fair, and you better be glad it's not fair. I think that's a little bit better. But anything that's going to end the conversation when somebody clearly needs to have a conversation, usually that it's not fair is a sign that we got to talk about it, right? That's usually what somebody is saying. Like, this feels wrong, we need to talk. And that's how we should translate the life's not fair, because it can breed some cynicism and learned helplessness, right? And so that's the full cartoon. Why isn't it ever unfair in my favor, right? But if we can, we need to turn cynicism into skepticism. Because we don't need to turn it into naivete. Like, if somebody's cynical, they're long past being naive. Like, they're never going back, right? But you could mature cynicism into skepticism. That's less defensive, that's less inflamed, and that's more thoughtful about it. And because I debated showing this. There's a lot of ways to, shut this down. But there's a learned helplessness that can come with cynicism that might not be there if we matured it into skepticism, right? That skepticism might be a little closer to the critical consciousness that we aspire to. But cynicism is disempowering. And it's usually a symptom of injustice. It's usually something, I believe that cynicism is usually a coherent response. But it's an insufficient coherent response. And we need to put a buffer there. It's a sign that they don't have a wedge, they don't have a buffer between the injustice of the world and the justice that they need. And students need to practice control over injustice. I think that's one of the biggest, there is injustice. You can't convince them otherwise. They're going to learn about it. They know about it already. But they need to practice control. Because I want to remind you where the research started with who didn't blame the victim? The person who paid the victim. They didn't blame the victim. When you can practice control over it, you don't need to hypothesize about it, right? When students can right a wrong, that's powerful. When students can practice establishing justice, that's important. So that's principle number 5. The school provides students with opportunities to practice and reflect on the character strengths that are shaping and forming their moral compass. They need to practice it, because if they don't practice it, then there's no getting past the cynicism. The practice is what safeguards them from victim blaming. It's what safeguards them from cynicism, because they get to do something, right? And so service learning can be an opportunity to do that. It lets them be justice agents. And so if, one of the best things that we, when little kids are in the I do it stage, a couple of people told me they have 3-year-olds, right? It's like the I do it stage. What do they really want to do? They really want to help. They really want to break the eggs for the scrambled eggs, right? And giving them opportunities to practice helping is one of the best things that we can do for the mental health of that child, because they want to be a group member. And group members get to do things. And so allowing our students to be a part of righting the wrong is a way that we establish belonging, and it's a way that we ward off helplessness. I believe that students can be, that education can be a vessel of justice. So I'd like to take this moment, and I'll leave it there. Parents and teachers can be justice gatekeepers. That there's a lot of the research in this that I've done has been in these contexts of injustice, and if I just scroll to here, which is one of my some of these slides were in Portuguese, and then I just realized that I didn't fully translate some of them. But here's kind of the logic model that we found, and we found it statistically worked, is that the support of the school environment, the structure of the school environment, and the social-emotional learning of the school environment, all of that predicted how fair students thought their life was, that personal justice. I typically get what I deserve. People usually treat me fairly. Those questions, the school climate of structure and support supported that, predicted that, and so did social-emotional learning, which then predicted virtues of justice, courage, and pro-social leadership. Because if I have, students will only stand up to a bully or try to make something right or try to stand up for another student if they think their voice will be heard, if they think there might be a chance of a change. And they do that because they feel like they have some sort of access to justice. They might be able to lend some of their justice capital to somebody else and stand up for somebody else. And they can do that if they feel a little bit personally empowered. And so justice is fostered through virtue. I want to go back here and say parents and teachers can be justice gatekeepers, because that research of justice, fostering of support and structure and SEL, fostering personal justice, access to justice, which fosters virtue, that was all in context of low-income schools. That is not saying that the people who have virtue are the people who have justice. That is in a context of a lot of social inequality. Brazil is one of the highest countries on the Gini index, the index of inequality. And so that is in a context of inequality, and those are the students that are on the brunt of inequality, that are bearing the brunt of inequality. And they are saying, if, not everybody's saying the school is fair, but the ones who do experience school as a fair place, they're doing it in spite of the injustice of their lives. They're not saying their life is fair. They're saying that there's a buffer, and that the school is that buffer, and so they actually can practice pro-social leadership and courage and justice. So I want, in your groups, at its best, how can your context be a justice gatekeeper and be a buffer to some of the injustices that your students live with? So go ahead. All right, if I can pause, we could. I'm looking for 2 examples, and then I want to talk a little bit more about relationships piece. So I would like 2 people to give me a brief example.
I thought of the work that Heather does with restorative practices. You mentioned the procedural justice with voice, transparency, being impartial, and being respectful. And I think those are 4 key parts of having a successful mediation. So, yeah, kudos to Heather.
One of the things we just spoke on was just the daily things that teachers does that's outside of their title. So like Miss Parker wipes the kid's face before they go home every single day. Miss Lucas goes out her way to teach life lessons and not just school lessons. Jake brought a program to our school that completely changed how the littles learned. And Miss Jones just on a daily basis shows her kids that she loves them. And so like I just think that's not necessarily in a teacher's title, but that's the way we bridge the gap.
Sorry, you're getting 3. I also think like what gets missed is adults. Leading adults is also important because some adults don't feel safe to arrive at work. Whether they're protested at school boards because they were hired and they don't fit the mold of what, so I speak from experience with that, but also just knowing that's true for many. Like, if the adult is nervous to be there, it's hard to then help the kids not be. So leading adults with also knowledge, you can't have access to reading if you don't have a teacher that's supported with knowledge to teach reading without a privilege, a curriculum rooted in privilege. So a lot of it does come down to adult knowledge helping then the adults that help the children.
It reminds me of Parker Palmer's quote. He said, "We teach who we are," right? And we have a much better likelihood of raising good kids if we're good adults, right? And that we can pass on things that are, and sometimes as teachers, you're supposed to pass on something that you don't have access to, but it's that hopeful mind that someday somebody will if you stand in the gap today. And that's the paradox piece of it. And that's a hopeful piece of it too, because it's a goal. It's a purpose, right? A purpose is probably more than just a goal. So thank you. Harvest these ideas and these principles because we forget about them very quickly. And so share ideas of where this comes from, and it comes from relationships, right? And by uplifting other people, like we just saw. Does anybody have to read Dogman comic books? Okay. Now I read these a lot. I have. Anybody know the Fair Fairy? All right. Fair Fairy is you have to read all of them to find the Fair Fairy. And the Fair Fairy is a satire character. The book's a lot of satire in there, some for adults too. And it's this fairy that if things are not fair, then let's break other people so that it's, if somebody doesn't have it, then I'm going to break yours because not everybody has it. And so I put this up here just as a reminder that injustice or justice can foster character. It can also be distorted in really awful ways. And so it's also motivations of justice that lead to notions of revenge. right? And so it's not just this natural thing. It really needs a lot of coaxing and mentorship. And the way that we do that is through relationships. And the examples that were given here were all very relational examples. So like, I understand that I'm preaching to the choir here. But the piece about relationships matters a lot. And here's something that I've thought about. Character is who you are when other people are around. Because very seldomly am I in a situation where I want to steal the candy bar and nobody's looking. Like, it just doesn't come up usually. It's the times that I really need character is when my child is screaming at me and I need patience. And I need to not lash out. And that is... that's when I really need to not be selfish, because I'm a really wonderful person all by myself. I am very cool. I am very calm. I am very selfless, and I am only selfish when other people are around. And I'm only impatient when other people are around. And so I really think that character is who you are when other people are around. Because it's only when it's in relationship that character matters, right? And so that's why character is so closely connected to social-emotional learning. And as I was thinking about, I was trying to conceptualize, well, how is social-emotional learning so connected to justice beliefs? And I think it's because when we teach kids to calm down and say their point of view, we're giving them access to justice. Because the child who can calmly state their opinion is going to advocate for themselves. And that child's going to be more powerful next year, right? And that child's going to grow up and have more access to justice because they can own it, they can expect it, they can demand it. But they have to be able to calm down because the child, we as in teachers, usually see the second punch, not the first one. All right, and it's the second punch that gets suspended. It's not the first one, usually, well, often, sometimes, right? And so it's teaching children to take a deep breath that might make their life more fair, because it doesn't mean that they didn't deserve that punishment, but the context around it was so unjust. And so I do think that teaching social-emotional learning, now if we stop at social-emotional learning, we run the risk, if we just teach them social-emotional learning skills, like being able to take a deep breath and persevere, then we also run the risk of raising socially competent jerks. Or you could fill in the expletive in there, right? You could raise a socially competent bad person. And because that's not alone, it's insufficient. But I also don't think that character education happens without being able to manage anger, right? Is that there's that other piece of it too, because it's usually when I do something that I regret, it's usually a lack of social-emotional skills. But I can also be a really, really gross person if I only had those social-emotional competencies, right? Then if I had no values to be able to deliver, then I just have a vessel and it's, nothing, no substance. So I think the character is the substance, but it requires that social-emotional competency. And that's one of the ways that we can give that to students, right? And so families and community are partners of our character initiatives because the students come in and out. And sometimes this is aspirational. Sometimes it's hard to reach families. Sometimes we don't have access to the students' community. But this is a really important piece of it. And it's a lot easier to drive character education home when you can get the parents to say the same thing. So one of the projects in Brazil is can we make students' life more fair through a character education program, right? And so it has a little acronym of these are the 4 ways, and it's a socio-emotional acronym. It's based on the WITS program in Canada, walk away, ignore, talk it out, seek help, just these very simple, fourth grader level ways to solve a problem. And I study social responsibility, but if we get these 4 things to be said by the families and the community and the school, then it's going to be a much stickier, right? And so if we can get families on board to say, and if we make it really complex, it's not going to stick. And so whatever sticky mantra that you can get to get the teachers saying the same, the families saying the same thing, that's going to be helpful. We teach who we are. We need to teach students to demand justice, and we can do that by giving them a taste of it, right? If we can give them a taste of it, then they can demand it. I was asked, is there a book that you'd like to give? And I really think I read a lot of academic empirical articles, and then I read things like Dog Man and picture books. And I really don't read that much in between. But then I thought, I asked, could I give a picture book? Could I say a picture? And so this isn't my gift, but it's my recommendation as a gift. And so I'm giving you The Rabbit Listen because it's one of my very favorite, and it's been a helpful way. My daughter's best friend, who's 6, just lost her dad. And my friend lost her husband, and I didn't necessarily want to have these conversations with my 7-year-old, but this is a book that gave me kind of a way to talk to her, kind of an opening conversation of what's her role as a friend. And I've thought a lot about, to my friend, I'm supposed to be a rabbit. And to my daughter is supposed to be a rabbit to her friend. We're just supposed to listen. Because justice is also the ministry of presence. And sometimes we just don't, not sometimes, most often we don't have a way to make our children's lives, our students' lives, our community's life more fair. But we can be there and we cannot shut down the conversation. And I think that is a role of justice. That's being a vessel of justice, is being present. And when I think of how these beliefs about justice were first studied in the 60s, one of the examples that stood out to me in one of the books was of a medical student who was one of the best doctors in residency, and was very attentive to her pediatric patients in really tough medical conditions until there was nothing more that she could do. And as soon as there was nothing more that she could do, she never did rounds anymore, and she let the nurses handle everything. And the way that the psychologists explain that is just the lack of being able to do anything. That person couldn't cope with staring at tragedy. And so she opted out. And staying present is a gift. And sometimes there's nothing else that you have to do. People will go through it all by themselves. So you'll notice that the elephant wanted to remember and Taylor didn't want her to remember. And the snake wanted to seek revenge and Taylor didn't want to seek revenge. And all of these, and just the rabbit listened. And then when the rabbit listened, then the rabbit remembered, then the rabbit thought about revenge, and then the rabbit wondered but the rabbit brought healing by doing nothing at all other than just staying in the room. And by staying in the room, by modeling to our children, the teenagers, the other adults in the room, by modeling how we can live in a paradox, pursue justice while not experiencing it. That's how we can educate character, is by living that paradox of pursuing something that doesn't exist. And I think that's the same strand that has led me to think about hope. And so in December, I want to. So this is through it all, the rabbit never left. And when the time was right, the rabbit listened to Taylor's plan to build again. And the rabbit said, I can't wait. But they waited through the grief. And being there through the grief and just staying present, I believe, is a form of relational and restorative justice. And when we jump straight to the punchline, which is like, don't yell at the other kids, and, sometimes the punchline is character, but we have to build it through a foundation of justice and care, because that's what character is. Character is justice and care. And so if the word character sounds different to you, the word of character, the principles are justice and care. And that applies. And that applies in the most vulnerable circumstances the most, right? I don't know, it applies everywhere the most. But don't underestimate what your students can do with pain when you give them purpose and belonging. And I want to end with a quote that's not really about justice and not really about hope, but I see the themes there. I recently started reading more of, I'm going to get her name wrong, Gobodo Madikizela, but she was a part of the Peace and Justice Reconciliation in South Africa. And so she sat through, she listened to a lot. And she listened, right? And there's justice and listening. Listening is a piece of procedural justice. And so I want to read this piece of an article that she wrote on trauma, forgiveness, and witnessing dance. We live in difficult and challenging times where political leaders do not value the very basis of things that represent the core of what it is to be human. The work of healing, peace, and justice has never been more urgent. At the same time, people involved in healing and peace building work perhaps have never experienced such challenges to the values that define their work, the value of care, justice, and compassion. For so often, when we express moral indignation and protest against the injustices we see around us, we may find ourselves falling into the trap of speaking the language of hate. So, our journey of healing and encounters with our enemies lead us back to ourselves. Yesterday's victims become tomorrow's perpetrators, and so the proverbial cycle goes. Our journey of healing in difficult times in our world is a daunting one. How do we transcend the cycles of hate and vengeance while facing daily the forces that produce it? Her work is amazing, and I think about, she studied forgiveness in the context of the unforgivable. And I am most curious about justice pursuits in the context of injustice. And I am most curious about hope in the context of despair. Because I think that paradox is what gives us purpose and what makes us uniquely human. It also makes our job incredibly difficult, but that modeling that we teach who we are piece is important. And so when I talk to you in December, I'll talk to you about hope. And I think about it as it's a virtue, it's not an expectation. In the same way that I think about justice as a virtue, not an expectation, something to strive for, I think about hope as a virtue, not an expectation. And so it's different from optimism. It's different than just expecting the good things to happen. And so there it is. I always tell my students that I study this because I don't understand it. And so I hope that you leave here more curious about it than anything else. So thank you.
I just want to clarify, the breakout sessions are 60 to 75 minutes. If you look up here on the screen, we put up the slide that kind of goes over our breakout times and our full retreat times. So the next one would be November 7th. You will meet with whatever group you decide at whatever time is selected by the coaches leading that group to meet, whether that's for your SEL group or if you choose restorative practice, but you'll be meeting with that group at that time.
Okay, because the clarifying question that people had was, the clarifying question that people had was, what time are the coaches meeting on the days that we don't have full days, and what day of the week? So has anybody decided that? I could only say for myself with the SEL, like I have done every single time, I don't establish a day and time. I establish the day and time co-created by you all of what's the day and time that works best for you. Okay? Restorative Practices does that. 11 Principles does that.
Book study is already set, so it will be at 7 p.m. on the 2 kind of off months from the full day retreats.
So there you have it. Yeah. Were there any other, and thank you, Future, were there any other questions just on the whole pertaining to the breakout session information? Oh, so like today, there'll be time and space in the afternoons that would honor the 60 to 75 minutes to keep the processes moving forward. Okay. On those full retreat days, 1 o'clock.
Right after lunch.
Yep.
1 to 2:15 or 1 to 2?
We're going to lean into the whole window of after a full meal, staying engaged, 1 to 2:15-ish. Some of you that may need to walk or take a nap will differentiate. I'm kidding. 1 to 2:15. Yeah, it's all about the details, so that's good to commit. We can do that.
And in your emails that was just sent out to you guys, there is a survey that you can kind of decide what your first choice of group would be and your second choice. So even if you haven't established a time and date that you want to that you're going to meet as a breakout session, you can still kind of let Julie and Jean know what group you would like first and what your second choice would be. And then last little plug I'm going to put in here before I hand the mic over is there's still quite a bit of food left out there. And they're going to take that back soon. So if you want to grab a plate and put something on it, I recommend you doing so quickly. Okay?
Great. Thanks. And before we move off of this slide, these slides will be shared with you, but each of those are linked to more information just so you can have along the way. So these slides are also a resource for you. Okay, so from the information you received about the breakout sessions, you've heard this term of the 11 principles. So we thought it would be wise, whether you're just been a returning group for a number of years, to take a little time on what we call the 11 principles of character education. So we're going to dive in with the understanding that this is a framework. So think about them as standards and learning targets that are the objective lessons and outcomes we want to achieve, right? They also help us define what character education is. And what I loved about this morning is Dr. Thomas really gave us some big terms with some complexity, but then narrowed down and zeroed in with some precision on the concepts. And that's what 11 principles do. It is a framework. So with you and your team, if you see the visual with the arrows, you have multiple perspectives. You may be from multiple schools on your team, multiple grade levels. The 11 principles can kind of help bring in some common language to synthesize your ideas and really formulate a common next step or a common vision. All right, so all those arrows come together. It is a framework that does this. Brings us together. It is also a set of tools that can help you, like a doctor diagnosing when you list the symptoms of something that represents your next best step or where you want to focus, where your school or organization is going to go. Okay, so it's also a set of tools where you can say, oh, here's what I think we need, and you and your team could, again, with precision, rally around that, make it a goal or a plan or action step so that you're all on the same page. Okay, so it's a framework and it's a set of tools. All right, so indulge me for a little bit. We just had some movement, but I need you to collaborate with your table, and I want you to have a table number that captures your level of understanding and comfort with the 11 principles, okay? Your background knowledge here. So here's the first grade teacher in me saying, if this is a phase of like, I'm kind of just soaking up the knowledge here, I don't really know what we're talking about, it's okay to say like, okay, we're at a 0 or a 1, all right? If you've been at this a few years, you know what some of the principles are, okay? You're in that middle of the pack, a face that's content, ready to go. And if you've been like living the dream, you've been in this work and you know about it with some precision, give yourself that kind of a rating, right? Give yourself permission to show out a little bit. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, collaborate with your team. One resource that's helpful is in your folders, there is a scoring guide that lists the 11 principles as well as some of the, what we'll call indicators under each principle. So you can use that as a discussion piece to talk about what this framework is all about. And after we come back in a couple minutes, I'm just going to ask one person to like give me the number for your table. And if you're so bold, tell me what you'd like to lean into and learn more about. Okay? All right. Give ourselves a couple minutes. Ready? Go. All right, everybody, let's bring it back together. And time for you to just share with me that fist to 5, your level of understanding. So I'm going to put my friends at Walker on the spot. And yeah, you have the right to pass. And if you pass, I'm just going to assign a number randomly. So you're going to be stuck with that. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Yeah. If you could hit pause, because we want everyone to hear you.
Terrifying. Is this thing on? All right. Can you hear me? Ooh, I can hear myself too. That's fun. Okay, so she has much more knowledge around character education than I do. This is only my 2nd year in the school, and my 1st year in the school was like, what is that? I'm doing it, but I don't know why I'm doing it. And that's why I'm here, is like, I want to learn more, and I want to be able to help the other people within the school who also have no idea why they're doing it, figure out why we're doing it, and actually like have a cohesive and clear projection forward, if that makes sense. So I'm sitting at a 1, but I'm really happy about it because like I'm here to learn more about it and I'm gonna get to the 5 sometime. So I'm sitting here like that, okay?
It was like an Olympics year, like number 1, strong, proud. There's different ones, you know this. I love it. All right.
Hello. I was going to give, I'm Sheena, by the way. I was going to give myself a 1, but after you said you had some level, I'm going to give myself a 0. Okay, so I come from like a corporate background and working in a nonprofit that is serving the youth. So we're adjacent to schools, so we're not technically living by, I don't want to say living by, but our framework is, I don't think is based on this 11 principles. So I'm coming with an open mind. I'm excited to be more immersed in the education background of things so that I can marry that with what I do in my day-to-day with the business side. I'm the director of operations. So I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And as a network, when we think about the Pearls team being school adjacent, we still feel like these 11 principles apply, and we'll rely on your feedback and to give voice for what you need more of. Fantastic. All right, I'm coming to Lois.
Hello, everyone. Lois Fletcher. I think as a table, we gave ourselves about a 2. This is my 3rd or 4th year at LACCS. I'm giving myself like a 2.5. Somewhere in the middle, like this eye of the tiger thing. So I have way too much information not to apply it. And so this is the year that it's like, we have to get deep into the application year. So I'm like 2.5, shooting for that 3, but I'm like, we got to do something with it.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you, Lois. All right, EVA team, Megan.
Hi. We have a group of people that have been doing this for a while and feel pretty confident in it, and we have people that are brand new this year. So collectively, we said we were about a 3, where we are all very enthusiastic about continuing to learn more, but we also are like experienced and have a little bit of knowledge on this.
Excellent. Thank you, EBA team. Okay. GHCTA.
As our group, we've gone back and forth. We're at 2.5. We have a fairly okay understanding of some of these principles and just building character education, but knowing that we can learn more, and we're excited to do so.
Thank you. And the St. Francis team. Just going to drop it.
We also agreed that we are in the 2.5 zone, and some of us have been in the program 3 years, some of us 2, and we're just kind of growing our team and all working on getting on the same page. So we're excited to be learning more.
Thank you. All right. That's super helpful on a number of levels. Number one, to know we're all growing, right? We're going to find ourselves in that learning curve, especially on a team, and those dynamics can really, I think as educators, tend to give us not as much credit as we deserve for where we're really at. What I heard in the room is that there's this need and this, I don't want to say urgency, but the willingness to really lean in to grow. Connect with your team, bring things back to your organization in school, and just take that next best step, which is, as coaches, what we're here to help you do. We're not going to spend a ton of time in each principle, but what I've done, since it is a framework, is I clustered them, so we'll look very quickly at each of them individually, but we'll spend a little bit more time in the clusters. So the first 3 of the 11 principles are really about defining core values or character traits, having an overall plan and approach, and then not losing sight of a focus on every student. And a great example, the St. Francis team has been at this for more than 1 year, and I'm going to just have Stacy come on up, because they have a living, wonderful example of the last year on this journey, particularly in growing in these first 3 principles.
Okay, so some of our team started, this is their 3rd year, and then another chunk of us started last year, so this is our 2nd year. And we were kind of divided that first year, and so we had like these 2 separate teams, and the first team thought like they had it all planned out from the year before, and then us as a second team came on, and we did not understand the assignment. We weren't even close. We were not on the same page. We didn't know what the other team was doing. So we spent a lot of time last year getting on the same page and working on our values. It literally took us an entire year to come up with 5 values. So our elementary school had 4, our middle school had 4, and our high school had 3. Some of them overlapped, most of them did not. And so now we've come to a consensus on 5 that we are really happy with, and we feel like we have some direction. But I think we all thought coming up with 5 values was going to be the easy part of all of this work, and it took us an entire year to get to that point. It was messy, it was emotional, but that's just the process. So we are really happy and proud of the work that we've done, and just a reminder, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. And that's such a good reminder that as we go through this journey, the level of messiness often translates on the other side as the renewed purpose and commitment that is just locked in. So I'm really super glad to hear St. Francis has taken those steps. I hope that momentum carries into the other work in the other 11 principles. Let's quickly just take a look at the language of each principle. Okay? An emphasis on defining what your core values or character traits will be. Principle 2 is that the school develops and implements those. There's a plan and there's an approach, okay? And the other indicators for Principle 2, that there are proactive steps that include becoming a learning community and helping students learn a lot of the SEL skills that hopefully we can impart to you through LACCS. In your folder, there's a whole laminated pamphlet on SEL. Again, those are on the tool side of this framework, something you can take and run with in your work this year. Okay, and the last principle of this cluster is every student understands practice is the core values embedded. Like Dr. Thomas said this morning, like it's about practice, right? If we can set up a culture and a climate, there's an environment where students give voice and we leave space for practice, whether that's service learning or practicing an SEL skill, we're going to be a better school, a better classroom, a better organization. Okay, so principle 3 is about that practice. Okay. Again, these slides will also serve as resources, and that these are linked to some videos of what other schools have done in their principles 1, 2, and 3, as well as just application testimonials and other artifacts from other schools. So being a LACCS network, we've pooled all of these artifacts and evidence pieces just as examples for you. So you have access to those to check out. Okay, next cluster, principles 4 through 7. I'm going to ask the EBA team to come on down because they have this great example of how they've grown as a caring community, as well as the reflection on character strengths, challenging academic curriculum, and encouraging students to do the right thing. But really, your practice over the last multiple years would be growing that caring community, correct? Okay, thanks.
Thanks. We just want to share 3 practical things we've done to create a caring community, which is principle number 4. The first thing we've done is starting with our staff. I think we've talked about like it starts with the adult culture in the school, and we do that by starting off the year in we put intentional groupings of staff with like totally different roles across the whole district. So we are a K4 through 12 district, and then usually at our school we're a Christian school, and so we spend time like in prayer, and they like learn about each other's like challenges and goals for the year. And then as the year goes on, we have professional development days, and on those days we assign their seats with their groups, so that like multiple times throughout the year they're with that returning group of people that they can be learning from and sharing with. And then we also try to make it fun. We have on each of our PD days we have a provided lunch for people. I think just giving them food makes a big difference. And then also during that lunch we'll combine it sometimes with like discussions or often like competitions, and we do make it competitive where we have a leaderboard with points, and then these points carry the whole year for the Golden Goat Award. It's like a trophy that lives in the school, so just kind of some fun stuff. We have like a staff spirit week, and so on that note, I just really quickly wanted to acknowledge that it's also Nina's birthday, so can we get some snaps for Nina? Woo! She loves the attention, you guys. All right, just kidding, she doesn't, she's so humble. Okay, Abby's gonna share about one of practice, and so is Nina.
I think 3 years ago, one of the initiatives we started was community days with the students. Specifically, we started with the middle school because we were seeing that there's not a lot of community between grade levels. So we wanted to have some kind of opportunity for all the middle school grade levels to be mixing and mingling, but doing things that they're interested in. So the first half of the community day, we do have some more competitions, but it's like homeroom versus homeroom. And then the second part of the community day, they move to their the stations of their choice. And then it's a mix of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders so that they get to do their interests with maybe some students they haven't really spent that much time with so that they can build up the community. And we got the promising practice, right? Yeah, for that one a couple of years ago. So, yeah. And we're still doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Lastly, we do buddies. First, we started off years ago with just buddies for our elementary students, where our 5th graders will go to K4, all that type of stuff. But now we do the whole campus buddies, so all the way from K4 to 12th grade. And the intention is just to build that community again, which is across the entire school. And so we're trying to show our older kids that our younger kids are watching them, that they are reflecting them what their behaviors are in the hallway. The younger kids are watching to see how they can behave when they either now or when they get older. And so it's been really good. So we start off with, of course, worship. We're doing worship buddies, but we also have moved it into any area of the day. So they can do math buddies, they can do reading buddies, they can do recess buddies, they can do lunch buddies, whatever the teachers decide. That's what type of buddies they do. We started yesterday was our first buddies of the year. It's every first Wednesday of the month, and the little kids love it. They see their buddies in the hallway, and they did their own personal handshake. So when they see each other in the hallway, they made a handshake yesterday. They do that together all year long. They talked about their favorite music, and it was great just to see. And this week is homecoming, so all of our high schoolers were, it was Men in Black yesterday. So it was really cool to see the older kids dressed as Men in Black, and the little kids like, what are you doing? And so Buddies has been like such a good, heartwarming time for the adults to see, but then for the older kids to see you are an example. And so no matter where you are in this building, there's somebody small looking at you and looking up to you. And so we want you to show those character traits at all times. Just like she said, character is when what you're doing when somebody can see you. And so we want that to reflect in our older kids so that our younger kids are watching.
Outstanding. Thank you. And a great example of how we can grow a more caring community as we practice and do that together, right? We can start to have some overlap for some of these principles. Okay, so looking at, again, the language of each principle, the school just leans into this ownership of we're going to work on this. We're going to do things that we feel create a more caring environment. And I underline this other piece, right? This is the new and improved principle number 4. The language added is where everyone feels they belong. And I love how Dr. Thomas unpacked that for us, of that feeling of belonging is important for not only students, but also for staff. And I think Jake gave voice to that. Like there's layers to each of these pieces where everyone feels they belong. Okay, principle 5 is that there's opportunities to practice, right? But again, it's through the character strengths and forming the moral compass. Other indicators for principle 5. Principle 6 is, again, we're going to offer this meaningful, challenging academic curriculum. Really, when I've worked with schools, what I say is the bread and butter as educators, right? When we think about the curriculum side of challenging students so they can grow academically. In that pursuit, let's not leave growing in their character out of the equation as well. The two are linked, smart and good. All right, other indicators for principle 6. And then principle 7, that there's encouragement to do the right thing because it's the right thing. And I love that Nina reminded us, when everyone's watching, that's the best time to spotlight doing the right thing. Okay, last cluster, I'm going to ask Dr. Chapin to come up. As principal of Meyer Middle School, he oversees a great process in working with multiple buildings for this theme of sustainability. So these are the resources for principles 4 through 7. And these are the components of the last of these 11 principles. They really focus on the who. And the main theme is making sure everyone's on board and that it's sustainable. So there's a time element of when you get a good thing going, make sure it continues, keep it fresh. And if people leave and step out and others step in, you have a process to onboard and keep the process moving forward.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so maybe somebody heard me talk about this at our breakout session. Just for some context, our school has 3,200 kids. There's one high school with 1,200 students. Our middle school has 750 kids, and then we have 4 elementary schools feeding into it. We started this in 2010. We sent a group, we called it our district steering committee, to the 11 principals training at the state conference. Then we brought those individuals back, and they were able to train the trainers. So they got to teach their staff around the 11 principles. And a really cool activity, if you have not done this, and I know as coaches we've offered this up as well. It's a really cool jigsaw activity. You take paper, big pieces of paper, you put each of the 11 principles, you take this document, and people write down on Post-it notes, where are we at with Principle 1? Give us examples of where we're living Principle 1, Principle 2. And pretty soon, you see all of these fill up, and you'll notice that some of them have a lot of Post-it notes. It's like, yeah, we're knocking out of the park there. And then you look at, oh, Principal 10, not so much. That should be a goal area for us. And so we do this about every 3 years in our district. And I get to work with each of our schools through that process. So if that's something that you're interested in doing and want some support with that, let us know. We also, to sustain this at a district level, this is all about shared leadership. We have really good building level committees, and then we have a district steering committee that meets once a month as well. And it's like a mini PLC. We just continue to push and challenge and learn and grow from each other. So that's a pretty cool thing. In terms of shared responsibility, I get involved in the ACT. I do a character kickoff. Tomorrow I have 8th grade. Tomorrow morning at 7:45, I do a 20-minute presentation. I show a short video. We talk about what this responsibilities or character trait for this month. We talk about what that means and what it looks like. It's really fun for me to do that. Other ownership that we do 3 themes at each grade level, and our teachers take responsibility for that. So 6th grade is called the Everest Project. It's goal setting through character. 7th grade is service learning project, and 8th grade is character and careers. Our teachers have taken full ownership of that, which is really cool. Those things would fall under Principle 9. Principle 10, I think engaging families is easier to do at the elementary school. It's more tricky as you get up the chain, as you may find out if you're middle school or high school. One thing that we've done to engage parents, we've surveyed our staff and our students and our parents around what do we value. We did this in 2010. We came up with 9 character traits. We sent out a survey again 5 years later. We kept the same character traits. We changed our poster, spiced it up a little bit. And then this past year, we did another survey. We're year 14, and we swapped out 2 of my, this is what you get for asking, right? 2 of my favorite character traits, positive attitude and citizenship, did not make the top 9. So I was like, darn it. But gratitude and curiosity made the list, which is pretty cool. And one of those is our first intellectual character trait, which I'm excited about. But we make magnets. And so at back to school, we had our family orientation. We're passing out magnets, and those things went like hotcakes. And I've had so many parents say, I still have mine from 8 years ago or 9 years ago on the refrigerator. So speaking a common language is really important. And then Principle 11 is just coming back to this, reflecting on this, using school climate survey data is really important. Using this reflective tool is really important every 3 years. And then setting goals. Your committee should be setting goals and then sharing those goals out with your staff. And so those are just some ways that we've sustained it in our district.
Thank you, Mark. And as usual, give him a hand. I hear about all the examples from River Falls, and I'm like, how long did it take for all of that to come together? And it's been many, many years, right? So that takeaway of like, oh my gosh, we'll never get there. You will. And it does take time, but each step leads to a better outcome. And when you look at it all together, it's beautiful. So thank you for those examples. Thank you for the other schools as well. Again, the language of each of the principles, it starts with either the school or the organization. And it's, again, a shared leadership, whereas Mark says, like, we're at this point now where teachers own this, and that's a really powerful place. The leadership grows and expands, so we want that to help lead to sustainability. All staff share the responsibility, Principle 9. Okay, Principle 10, that ripple effect is not only inside the school, but it cascades beyond the walls into the families and communities. They are partners. A lot of times as educators, it's so easy to lose track of that. They are partners, right? Just as I want to hear my students' voice, I want to hear my family's voice, the parents' voice. That is very important. And then finally, there's a system in place where there's continuous improvement. Mark mentioned survey data, or some way to keep us on track so as we grow, we don't lose sight of some of the foundational things, which can sometimes happen. We are busy. All right, so that is a very quick victory lap around the 11 principles.